Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the San Francisco Planning Commission hearing for Thursday, July 20th, 2023. To enable public participation, SFGov TV is broadcasting and streaming this hearing live, and we will receive public comment for each item on today's agenda. Each speaker will be allowed up to 3 minutes, and when you have 30 seconds remaining, you will hear a chime indicating your time is almost up. When your allotted time is reached, I will announce that your time is up and take the next person queued to speak. We will take public comment from persons in City Hall first and then open up the remote access lines. For those persons calling in to submit their testimony, you need to call area code 415-655-0001 and enter access code 2664-669-0851 and press pound twice. At this point, you should be able to hear the hearing live, and you'll need to wait for the item you're interested in speaking to and for public comment to be announced. To comment, you must enter *3 to raise your hand, and once you've raised your hand, you will hear a prompt that you have raised your hand to ask a question. Please wait to speak until the host calls on you. When you hear you are unmuted, that is your indication to begin speaking. If you're joining us via WebEx, please log in via the link found on today's agenda and enter password CPC2023 and use the raised hand icon to ask a question. Best practices are to call from a quiet location, speak clearly and slowly, and please mute the volume on your television or computer. For those persons attending in person, please line up on the screen side of the room or to your right. Finally, I'll ask that we all silence any mobile devices that may sound off during these proceedings. At this time, I would like to take roll. Commission President Tanner.
Here.
Commissioner Braun.
Here.
Commissioner Diamond.
Here.
Commissioner Imperial.
Here.
Commissioner Koppel.
Here.
And Commissioner Ruiz.
Here.
Thank you, Commissioners. First on your agenda is consideration of items proposed for continuance. Item 1, case number 2022-010007 CU8 345 Spear Street. A conditional use authorization is proposed for continuance to October 26th, 2023. And under your regular calendar, Commissioners, item 15 for case number 2019-004772 CUA at 3250 through 3270 18th Street. A conditional use authorization is requesting a 1-week continuance to, that would be July 27th. I have no other items proposed to be continued, so we should open up public comment. Members of the public, this is your opportunity to address the Commission on either of the 2 items being proposed for continuance, only on the matter of continuance. Again, if you're in the chambers, please come forward. If you're calling in remotely, you need to press *3 or raise your hand via WebEx. Seeing no request to speak, Commissioners, public comment on your continuance calendar is closed, and it is now before you.
Is there a motion on the continuance calendar? Commissioner Imperial?
Move all items as proposed.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that motion, then, to continue items as proposed, Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Commissioner Ruiz?
Aye.
Commissioner Diamond?
Aye.
Commissioner Imperial?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
And Commission President Tanner?
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 6-0. And will place us under your consent calendar. All matters listed here under constitute a consent calendar are considered to be routine by the Planning Commission and may be acted upon by a single roll call vote of the Commission. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the Commission, the public, or staff so requests, in which event the matter shall be removed from the consent calendar and considered as a separate item at this or a future hearing. Members of the public, this is your opportunity to request that any of these, I should call them into order, actually. Item 2, case number 2022-010646 CU8 1970 Ocean Avenue. Item 3, case number 2022-005802 CU8 1688 Pine Street. Number E210, a conditional use authorization. Items 4A and B for case numbers 2022-009996 OFA and CUA at 1 Beach Street, office development authorization and conditional use authorization. Item 5, case number 2023-000853 CUA at 728 Pacific Avenue, a conditional use authorization. Item 6, case number 2022-012067 PCA, Code Corrections Ordinance Planning Code Amendment initiation. Item 7, case number 2022-004380 CU8 35 Valley Street, conditional use authorization. Now, members of the public, if you would like to have any of these items heard today, you need to request that they be pulled off of consent. Seeing no requests to speak, Commissioners, public comment on the consent calendar is closed. Commissioners, there is a request from Commissioner Diamond to separate item 2 and consider that separately as she has a conflict.
Commissioner Diamond, would you share your conflict for the record?
Yes, I own some AT&T bonds, so need to recuse myself from voting on that item.
Do we need to vote to recuse her in this case?
Not when there's such a clear conflict.
Okay.
So it's unnecessary. So what we can do is just take up item 2 separately first and then.
Great. Is there a motion on item 2 on the consent calendar? Commissioner Imperial?
Move to approve item 2.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that motion to approve item 2 on your consent calendar, Commissioner Braun,
Aye.
Commissioner Ruiz,
Aye.
Commissioner Diamond, Commissioner Imperial,
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel,
Aye.
and Commission President Tanner.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 5-0. And now for the remainder of your consent calendar, Commissioners.
There a motion on items 3 through 7? Commissioner Braun?
Move to approve items 3 through 7.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that motion, then, to approve the remainder of your consent calendar, items 3 through 7, Commissioner Braun,
Aye.
Commissioner Ruiz,
Aye.
Commissioner Diamond,
Aye.
Commissioner Imperial,
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel,
Aye.
and Commission President Tanner.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 6-0. And will place us under Commission Matters for item 8, the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'll be sharing the land acknowledgement today. The Planning Commission acknowledges that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of Ramaytush Ohlone community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 9, Commission comments and questions.
Any comments or questions from commissioners? I will just say, in the capacity of a different job that I have, I got to tour a project site. This is the condos that we approved across from the Palms a few years ago, and it's under construction. It's going to be 550 or 505, I can't remember now, units for sale, which is really exciting, and I got to go down into the site. So things are happening, and around the corner is an office building that's also under construction, being built on spec, so we'll see if they get a tenant. But it was good to just see folks out working and just feeling a little bit of like, okay, there are still things happening and moving in the city, even if we can focus sometimes on what we don't have, like all the projects in the pipeline, but there are projects that we have approved that have gotten underway. So it was really good to be out there and see that. I don't see any other comments or questions from commissioners.
Very good. Department matters. We should probably take item 11 out of order. Through the chair, review of past events at the Board of Supervisors. I have no report from the Board of Appeals, and the Historic Preservation Commission did meet yesterday, so there is a brief report.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs. First on the land use agenda this week was the landmark designation for the Parkside Library branch located at 1200 Taraval Street. This landmark designation was initiated by Supervisor Marr last December, and once Supervisor Engardio took office, he assumed sponsorship. The HPC heard this item on May 17th of this year and unanimously recommended approval. The Parkside Branch Library was constructed in 1951 as the prototype for the Focus Building Campaign of modern branch libraries, consisting of 8 buildings constructed between 1951 and 1966. Parkside Branch Library is historically significant for its association with the social and cultural shifts in post-war American library programming and design. It is also architecturally significant as it embodies the principles of mid-20th century American public library design. Displays a signature and innovative style developed by Appleton and Wolford and is representative of the work of Appleton and Wolford, an architecture firm of merit. The committee voted unanimously to forward the item to the full board with a positive recommendation, and Supervisor Peskin did sign on as co-sponsor. Next on the agenda was the amended version of the commercial to residential adaptive reuses for downtown revitalization ordinance. This commission heard the item on July 13th and recommended unanimous approval. At the Land Use Committee this week, there was no discussion or public comment on the item. However, Supervisor Peskin offered 2 amendments that would remove the administrative review of certain scopes of work in both Article 10 and 11 districts. The Land Use Committee approved the 2 amendments and then recommended the item to the full board with a positive recommendation. Next, the committee considered the duplicated file of the Awning and Sign Amnesty Program ordinance. The commission heard this item at their June 1st hearing and voted to approve the ordinance with a host of recommended modifications. The Land Use Committee first heard this item on June 12th when they duplicated the file so the original ordinance could move through the legislative process, while the commission's recommended modifications were drafted to form. At the hearing this week, the committee incorporated many of the Planning Commission's recommended modifications, including those to limit the program to business signs, remove the 5-year look-back requirement, and require signs that participate in the amnesty program to still comply with illuminating provisions. This week, there was little discussion from the committee members and no public comment. The committee voted to move the duplicated file forward to the full board with a positive recommendation. Lastly, the committee considered Supervisor Melgar's Family Housing Opportunity SUD. The proposed ordinance returned to committee after amendments were made last week, many in response to community feedback. Supervisor Melgar's additional amendments include to 1, add a pre-application neighborhood notice, which this Planning Commission currently requires for all projects subject to neighborhood notice, consolidating rent control program sections within the administrative code, and some additional clerical amendments. Supervisor Mandelman's office proposed an amendment that would ensure projects in the central neighborhood's large residential and Corona Heights SUD would still be subject to conditional use controls imposed in that SUD should they trigger it. And Supervisor Peskin proposed several additional amendments, with the most noteworthy being to 1, require a CU if demoing more than 2 rent-controlled units, ensuring group housing SUD controls still apply, and amendments to ensure that only 1 unit would be permitted in the rear yard should the project be allowed to have more than 4 units based on lot area. Supervisor Preston chaired the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Association, submitted a letter of concern. He also raised questions about the neighborhood notice, how neighborhood concerns are resolved, and if the demo permits are still appealable. There are approximately 15 public commenters, with the majority opposing the ordinance for not incorporating affordability requirements, concerns regarding the loss of rent-controlled units, and wanting additional time to review and refine the legislation. There were also commenters who supported the recent amendments, particularly the addition of the required notice. The ordinance was then amended to include Melgar's and Mandelman's amendments and continue to next week. The other amendments proposed by Peskin had not been drafted to form yet. And then this week at the full board, the Polk Street and Haight-Ashbury Neighbor Commercial District Ordinance passed its second read, and a host of ordinances passed their first read, including the Planning Code and Zoning Map Amendment for 98 Franklin Street, the ordinances associated with the Port of San Francisco Waterfront Plan update, the landmark designation for the Parkside Library, the Commercial to Residential Adaptive Reuse and the Downtown Economic Revitalization Ordinance, and the existing Awning Amnesty Program. So in addition to that, the board also adopted findings related to the disapproval of the conditional use authorization at 301 Toland Street, and adopted a findings related to the amended conditional use authorization for 1160 Mission Street. And that's all I have for you today.
There are no questions for Mr. Starr. The Historic Preservation Commission did meet yesterday and adopted recommendations for approval for 7 legacy business registry applications. The Dubliner, which has been around for 36 years, under glass custom framing. It's been around for 38 years. Delano Nursery, which has been around for 101 years. Frescotti Restaurant, which has been around for 37 years. Adventure Cat Sailing Charters for 32 years. Ellie and Ava Company, which has served San Francisco for 53 years. It's the only music store in Chinatown, or instrument store, I should say. And then Enclosures International Corporation, which has been around for 45 years. And then finally, they heard the Cultural District's informational presentation that is on your agenda today. Seeing no questions, we can move on to Director's Report.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Nothing from me today.
General public comment. At this time, members of the public may address the Commission excuse me, on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission, except agenda items. With respect to agenda items, your opportunity to address the Commission will be afforded when the item is reached in the meeting. Each member of the public may address the Commission for up to 3 minutes, and when the number of speakers exceed 15 minutes, general public comment may be moved to the end of the agenda. SF Gov, can we go to the overhead?
Okay. There, so good afternoon. You get the idea. It's a pair of flats. I'm going to talk about the residential flat policy. That's being reviewed right now by your staff. They haven't taken out a permit yet, but the plan, and I've discovered it on SFUMB website, the plan is to knock that down, demolish it. It also has a UDU. It's a really nice building. I think there were tenants there, but I can't verify that. I'll leave that to you. See, there's the entrance. There's where the UDU is. And I think I want to bring this up because I think it goes back to the flat policy, which the Commission passed October 12th, 2017. You had a big discussion about it. You were going to sunset it when the RET passed, but of course the RET never passed. So if you look at resolution number 20024, there's all kinds of whereases that are still very pertinent. And one of those is about there's too much market rate housing and you need flats because these are middle income families can live there. And my problem with this, besides the knocking it down, is the change in the configuration. And here is what they're going to do to it. So they're going to go up, they're going to go out, they're going to go down. So it's going to be a mega mansion. Too many mega mansions, probably $3 million each if the market sort of stays like it is. And now it's the typical flat thing, as you can see from there. So my point is that I would really think and hope. Oh, and it costs $2.5 million, so it's a $2.5 million teardown, which you can have an opinion on that. I have an opinion on that. I think that's insane, but. So I don't think this is in spirit of the ordinance. I think there were other buildings like that. There's one that had an interior remodel. It had basically an over-the-counter, and I swear in the ad it only says one kitchen, but they kept the two doors. And Mr. Teague had a project like that at the Board of Appeals, where they put the wall down and then he made them put it back up. So it's still an issue. The spirit of the flat policy, at least based on the whereases in your resolution, the Commission's resolution 20024, was to, I think, keep the configuration of the flats, because that was the way you could really ensure that they would stay as the typology that you want, that the Commission wanted, that the staff wanted, to preserve this type of housing for people, as it says here, between 80 and 120% of median income. And I don't know what that was different than it is now in 2017. But I really hope you'll consider codifying the flat policy and making it very clear that if you're talking about the configuration of the existing units, not just the exposure, which is what's being used in this, is going to justify this as the exposure if this thing is approved by your staff. Thank you very much.
Seeing no other members of the public in the chambers coming forward, let's go to our remote caller.
Commissioners, my name is Dave. Apparently you're not getting an update from the Board of Appeals. I happen to be the appellant in a matter that was heard this week. The Planning Department's issuance of numerous permits for modern signage on the pristine 83-year-old Rincon Annex demonstrates the unintended and unwanted consequences of haphazard streamlining. The president of the Board of Supervisors, Mr. Peskin, testified in person at the Board of Appeals hearing. I'm surprised nobody wanted to mention that to you. He testified that the planning department erred in issuing these permits. There were also comments and letters from 20 other individuals and organizations all over town opposing the issuance of these permits for signs on Rincon Annex. A commissioner on the Board of Appeals did research himself and discovered that the planning department is apparently ignoring Article 11. It's also clear they are misinterpreting Section 1006.6 and the 2018 ordinance that encouraged streamlining. Commissioners, when the mayor and the full Board of Supervisors rule that a building is to be landmarked, that means it must be preserved. The planning department must carry out their directive. Issuing permits for 4 25-foot high blade signs on a nearly pristine 80-year-old streamlined modern building is not following the wishes of the mayor, the Board of Supervisors, or the people of San Francisco. If I didn't know better, I would almost think that the deep state really does exist, but it's not in Washington. It's in the planning department in San Francisco. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is Larissa Petroncelli with United to Save the Mission. Apologize for not being able to call in earlier. United to Save the Mission has been working with representatives of La Scuola to build a relationship and enter into a community benefits agreement to ensure that this project is integrated and supportive of our low-income Latinx community that continues to experience displacement with surging rates of homelessness and the increasing loss of cultural spaces like San Carlos Hall as gentrifying forces threaten the core of this historic cultural community and loss of its cultural identity. USM is actively engaged in creating an agreement with La Scuola, and it would be very helpful if we can have a short postponement to conclude what we hope are the final steps in the process. Thank you.
Okay, last call for general public comment for items not on today's agenda. Seeing no other requests to speak, Commissioners, general public comment is closed, and we can move on to your regular calendar for item 12, case number 2023-005238, PCA, conditional use for residential projects in RM, RC, and RTO districts, Planning Code Amendment.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Audrey Merloni, Planning Department staff. The proposed ordinance would amend the Planning Code to require conditional use authorization in residential mixed, residential commercial, residential transit-oriented, except for residential transit-oriented mixed districts, for residential housing developments that do not maximize their residential density. The maximum residential density would be defined in the ordinance for each zoning district that I mentioned, and those maximums are detailed in the executive summary under the way it would be. The ordinance would additionally create a new subsection in the Planning Code that would specify conditions that must be present for a project to be exempt from either the minimum density, the minimum and maximum unit size, or both. These conditions are also laid out in detail in the executive summary, but generally, to qualify for an exemption from the conditional use authorization, the project would be limited to either a 2,000 square feet or 3,000 square feet maximum unit size, would need to show its existing conditions make it infeasible to maximize density, would need to increase the unit count, and/or would need to meet minimum unit proportionality requirements. Lastly, the ordinance would require 3 new findings be made in addition to Section 303C findings for projects that are subject to the conditional use authorization. Those findings are: one, that the project proposes the maximum physically feasible density based on existing lot conditions or form-based restrictions on development; and two, that the project proposes additional density equal to that of adjacent buildings; and three, maximum density is financially or physically infeasible. As some background, the ordinance intends to modify and make permanent a set of interim controls that were active from January of 2021 through January of this year. And so as such, we were able to analyze the projects that were affected by those interim controls. And I wanted to note that since the publishing of your packets, we have found 2 additional cases affected by the interim controls, both of which sought to expand a single-family home, but to differing degrees. The result of those proposals was that the Commission denied the conditional use authorization for the project, which sought to add approximately 2,000 square feet to their single-family home, and approved the project, which sought to add approximately 900 square feet to their single-family home. So the department found that the interim controls appeared to be most successful at accomplishing their goal of incentivizing density for proposed new construction projects. New construction projects are better able to accommodate denser buildings as they can be designed from the ground up versus having to work within existing buildings' physical constraints. In addition to our analysis of the interim controls, the department has found that since the Commission's discretion to deny conditional use authorizations for code-compliant development projects is limited, and conditional use authorizations for small-scale residential projects are a significant drain on both the department and the Commission's time and resources, new requirements for housing developments should be objective in nature. That being said, we'd like to emphasize our support of the goal of the proposed legislation to facilitate and encourage the development of multifamily housing. We just believe that this goal is better accomplished through a set of objective standards and simplified permit processes for the projects that the city considers ideal. We've discussed this with President Peskin, who is generally supportive of an objective process over creating a new conditional use requirement. He has requested some additional changes to the recommendations in your executive summary, which the department is supportive of, and I will be sure to highlight those as I go through our recommended modifications. So with that, the department's recommended modifications are as follows. 1, modify the ordinance to replace the conditional use authorization requirement with objective minimum density standards for new construction in the RM, RC, and RTO, except RTO-M districts, and that they would require 75% of the maximum density, with that maximum density mirroring the proposed ordinance's maximum density. Number 2, for new construction projects in the subject zoning districts, require that no unit be smaller than 1/3 the size of the largest unit in the building. Number 3, replace the ordinance's proposed list of exceptions to minimum density and unit sizes with a simplified single exception to the department's recommended objective standards for minimum densities and on minimum unit sizes as follows. Expansions of single-family homes may expand their gross floor area by no more than 25% measured over 10 years, or to result in a home no more than 3,000 square feet, whichever is greater. And number 4, to incentivize projects that in the subject zoning district to build the ideal projects, the projects that we are hoping and wanting to see, by removing the conditional use authorization for demolition, which is our 317 conditional use authorization, and public initiated discretionary review, and only applying objective residential design standards if the project can meet all of the following criteria. First, maximizing the allowable density, not including ADUs. Second, meet the 1/3 unit proportionality requirements. Third, is not proposing the demolition of a previously identified known historic resource. Fourth, which is in your packet, which we will probably not recommend, is does not propose a building subject to the Ellis Act. We're still researching whether or not that is possible or allowed. But we will wait on the city attorney to determine that for us. Next, does not require any exceptions or waivers from the planning code requirements other than the conditional use under 317, obviously. And then additionally to what we suggested, President Peskin has suggested the following additional requirements for projects seeking this exemption. They'll look fairly similar to what you saw in Supervisor Melgar's Family Housing Opportunity SUD. So again, these would be additional to what we've already suggested, and we are supportive of them, which would be that there could be no tenant buyout in the property within the last 5 years, no tenant occupancy within the last 5 years, and the project does not seek to demolish a building with more than 2 rent-controlled units. That concludes staff presentation, and I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Members of the public, this is your opportunity to address the commission on this matter. If you're in the chambers, please come forward. If you're calling in remotely, you need to press *3 or raise your hand via WebEx.
Commissioners, Chris Schulman, member of the public, Lower Polk. I'm speaking in support of the ordinance today. The ordinance is pro-housing. There's a lot of not a lot, but a reasonable number of proposals that in zoning districts that are zoned for multi-housing, but propose single housing or expansion of single housing, and it's not, that's not what we need. And this ordinance will address that. It's reasonable, and I encourage you to move it forward with positive recommendations so that we can implement these controls, because as we speak, these proposals are coming out on a week-by-week or month-by-month basis, and getting it done now is prudent. So thank you so much for your consideration, and thank you for the Planning Department for your thoughtful review and consideration and support of this ordinance. So thank you.
Thank you, Georgia Shudish. I was going to come today because I saw the 317 thing, and you know my antenna always go up when I see anything that says 317. But I think Supervisor Peskin, President Peskin's amendments do that. I was a little distressed to see that there'd be no CU, and I still have to question the issue of subjective versus objective. I mean, for years, everybody thought 303 findings and 317 findings were objective enough, and now all of a sudden they're subjective just because the HAA has sort of overwhelmed us and everything. What I was going to talk about was where my mother lived. If I could have the overhead, please. And I think President Peskin's thing takes care of it. That's where she lived for 30 years, and it's a 5-unit building. It's a huge lot. It's a 30 by 150 lot in the Richmond district in the RM1. And there's like this little sliver of RM1 there, and there are others scattered around. And I think that, you know, it would have been a terrible thing to see that building torn down with 5 rent control units. But I think what I've read, what Ms. Maloney just said, I think that's okay. But the other issue I have is that it has a huge yard. That house covered half the lot. So it's conceivable that they could build on the rear of that lot and the tenants would have no say-so in it, whatever. But that's, you know, maybe that's... The other thing I want to say is, here's another building that's closer to home. That's 2 units, but hopefully that will be protected if there's 2 rent control units. I don't know. I mean, I understand the need for this. The other thing I want to point out is a lot of these RM districts are adjacent to RH2. So, you know, is that going to be a problem? And I guess that's it. I mean, here's this map that I had made for the RET, and you can see all the yellow are the RM, the non-RH districts, and a lot of those yellow are not in a concentrated area. They're adjacent to RH2, RH1, even some RH3. They're on corners. So, I mean, there may be other things that affect that. But I just do think that the whole idea, the subjective versus the objective, I think that's troubling, that you're not going to be relying on the criteria that's been relied on for years. And, you know, go back to the Century Urban feasibility studies. The one especially May 6th, where they talk about that. That was from the housing element. People have forgotten about that. Anyway, that's all. Thanks very much. And I think Supervisor Peskin, President Peskin's amendments take care of my concerns that I had about the staff recommendations. So I guess everything's copacetic. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other members of the public in the chambers, wishing to submit their testimony. Let's go to our remote callers.
Good afternoon, President Tanner and Commissioners. This is Jake Price on behalf of the Housing Action Coalition. We are appreciative of planning amendments as we are in strong opposition to adding any conditional use requirements, which is just an additional constraint imposed upon housing construction, something we committed to not doing in our housing element unless it's, of course, paired with a reduction in constraint. Just a few weeks ago, a housing project that was maximizing density at 1151 Washington was blocked at the Board of Supervisors, which came after the planning department rejected the initial project application because it failed to maximize density. Do we want density or do we not want density? We are not being consistent and we are confusing those who are looking to build housing. Let's stop fucking with people and let them build the housing that we desperately need. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Mark Macy, Principal of Macy Architecture, and I was the architect for the 1151 Washington that Jake just mentioned. I also believe that this is a cynical piece of legislation. It's, in fact, anti-housing masquerading as pro-housing. It will result in a petrification of the anti-housing status quo in the author's supervisal District 3, as well as other districts, which, not coincidentally, consist primarily of the zoning districts affected by this legislation. This legislation is the exact opposite of what the city should be doing and what it is promised to do in the housing element. The city has promised to remove barriers to housing creation, such as conditional use authorization, whereas this legislation expands the barriers with yet another expansion of conditional use. We have a perfect example in the cynicism that undergirds this legislation and the true intentions of its author in the recent thwarting of 1151 Washington at the Board of Supervisors. That project was a modest project on Nob Hill that replaced the project sponsor's single-family residence with 10 units multifamily housing, including an affordable unit. It was 100% in compliance with all relevant local and state laws, and it received a Category 32 CEQA exemption. As it maximized density, it was also 100% in compliance with the author's interim version of the proposed legislation before you. It is the exact kind of small-scale urban infill that the city ostensibly is trying to encourage. Nevertheless, the legislation's author led the charge to successfully stymie the project by upholding a spurious CEQA appeal. In the process, the author and two of his colleagues threw the planning department, as well as the fire department, under the bus, overriding their expertise and questioning their professionalism. Furthermore, they undermined our local laws, the Mauer and Shadow ordinances in the process, ordinances that were passed by the very board to create certainty around the very issues that the author sent the project back to planning for very expensive, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, lengthy, small project killing, and entirely pointless CEQA analysis. Accordingly, if the city and this commission is truly interested in maximizing density, as this proposed legislation purports to want to do, then at a minimum, it should recommend modifying the legislation to grant ministerial approval, i.e. no conditional use and no CEQA, for all projects that maximize the density in the specific districts. That would be truly progressive pro-housing policy. Thank you for your consideration.
Hi, my name is Joe Demento. I'm a resident of Glen Park, and I am calling to oppose adding additional conditional use requirements. I appreciate planning amendments, but in general, this legislation, I think, is not helpful for our really tremendous housing shortage and crisis that we have in San Francisco. There's about 10,000 people experiencing homelessness at any given time, and median rent for a two-bedroom apartment is about $3,000. And we need to start making it easier to build housing, not adding more hurdles or sticks to prevent the construction of housing. I think we've seen for the last 3 or 4 decades that, in general, building new housing in San Francisco is extremely difficult, and this proposed piece of addition to the process will just make that harder. So while I appreciate planning to housing crisis seriously, especially if we want to be in compliant with the housing element very soon. So thank you very much. Again, I am a District 8 resident, and I strongly oppose this.
Okay, last call for public comment on this item. Again, if you're in the chambers, please come forward. If you're calling in remotely, you need to press *3 or raise your hand via WebEx. Seeing no additional requests to speak, commissioners, public comment is closed, and this planning code amendment is now before you.
Great, thank you, President Peskin. Thank you, staff, for your analysis and suggestions. Ms. Maloney, I have a couple questions just to make sure I understand kind of how the proposed staff modifications would function to make sure I'm understanding it right. Definitely understand that we're kind of trying to focus on where we did see some good traction with the interim controls, which is on new construction. So what happens to a single-family home that does want to add size? Is that where there would still be some limitations, which I think is number 3, would still be for the expansions, and everything else is mainly on new construction, or, you know, since there's not a lot of totally vacant lots in cases where they're essentially demolishing an existing building and building new, and then the expansions would just be just help me understand what happens with single family home expansions
Sure.
and understand that a bit.
Essentially, your presumption is correct. So recommended modification number 3 is the only one we're really recommending that touches if somebody wants to expand an existing single-family home versus demo new construction of creating new units.
Great. And just for the 10 years there, is that in 10 years you get 25% up to 3,000, and then the next 10 years do you get more 25%, and then, or is 3,000? Like, how are we going to be measuring that? Because I do worry about things that have like time relativity as like projects could have something happen, you know, if this is an ordinance kind of just going on forever. So they get one shot for 1 decade and then that's it? Or, you know, help me understand how that would function.
It's my understanding that it would start over every 10 years.
Okay, so I get to 3,000, let's say, and I want to do more. Can I do 25% more then of my 3,000 square foot home?
Sure. Over 20 years, I suppose you could do up to a 50% expansion of your existing.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand that. Okay, so that's really kind of, we've really tried to reframe the ordinance as minimum density for new construction, which I think is appropriate for these zoning districts that we're focused on. And I know we've struggled. Supervisor Mandelman obviously had his legislation trying to figure out, we struggled, like, should there be a maximum home size? And I think in that case, it was hard to see one being appropriate for the entire city. But I think what I do like about this legislation is really focus, and with the planning department's, suggestions, focusing on certain areas where we know we want to see more density, right? It isn't just like one size fits all for the entire city. So I do appreciate that. Ms. Maloney, sorry, one other question for you. For number 4, under the letter C, a known historic resource, is that known at the time the application is complete and we're not going to do a historic resource evaluation, or you still apply but you still have to have a historic resource evaluation to determine if you're an A, B, or C? Or like if you're a B, when you apply, you just get to stay a B and we're not going to check into it? Like, help me understand what that means.
Sure. So basically, this is something you're going to be seeing a lot for future recommendations on legislation. We're probably actually going to have to come back to you for legislation where we had programs set up where it said a historic resource versus a known historic resource. And essentially what we're trying to say here is if you come in under one of these applications and you are a B building, you would be eligible to continue through the application process and apply through this program. You'd be eligible for it. We would still go through our historic resource evaluation for B buildings, and if it turns out through that process that you are an A building, all of the requirements that A buildings are subject to would also apply. So it might require you to modify your project to meet that. However, it's not going to necessarily require you or exclude you from applying for this program and going through the process.
I mean, if you're proposing demolition of an A resource, wouldn't that kind of 86 your entire project?
Yeah, it would.
So I don't know. I mean, are we just getting more specific, or are we trying to be more confusing? Because it seems unhelpful a little bit.
This is something that we are required to do because of advice from our city attorney.
Got it.
And so we have to kind of make sure that projects know on the day they apply if they are eligible or not eligible. And so if a project's historic status is not known, then it's not known whether they're eligible to even apply until after.
So we're essentially assuming eligibility until proven otherwise.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, good luck to all of those folks with B buildings.
Commissioner Tanner, if I can
yes.
just maybe help add some clarity. Practically speaking, no one applies for a conditional use to demolish a Category B building without them digging into that first. We do have processes available where somebody can get a determination one way or the other before they invest in that
Okay,
conditional
that's
use.
great.
And practically speaking, that's what people do.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know. Thank you for clarifying. And then just to make sure for the amendments that President Peskin has also added, no tenant buyouts, no tenant occupancy, and we're still looking on whether or not, I think we're in no demolishing more than one rent-controlled unit, or any rent-controlled units, two, more than two. More than two rent-controlled units. So I guess maybe just looking back at the projects that have occurred, which again are not that many. So it's, I think, went from 6 to 8. You found 2 more. So it's something at least. And I know we know it's kind of a slow time for construction, so maybe not the time we would see the most. I'm just curious as we look at those, like if those would have stopped any of them or had any of them go forward, and if we think that this will apply mainly to single family homes that would be increasing density, or is it conceivable that there could be a multifamily home, maybe it's 2 units, that wants to become larger, where now it would have had tenants conceivably within the last 5 years because it would have rented out one of the units, that now this is precluded from this program. Now, granted, they could go through a CU and through the other process, but I'm just trying to understand kind of how we see that happening, and if we know anything from the few projects we have that would shed some light on that.
Sure. It's a great question. These are suggestions that came in relatively recently, so we haven't taken them and looked back at those 8 projects specifically. However, I think I want to remind the Commission that is just a benefit program. So it's not going to prevent projects that might not meet one of those criteria from going forward with their application, especially if they are proposing to maximize the allowable density on the lot, which is still something that we want. But yes, they may still have to go through the CUA for under 317. They would still be subject to a publicly initiated DR, but it doesn't prevent the project from moving forward.
Just not under this program. Great. With that, I know I see Commissioner Imperial. I will say I'm very supportive of the modifications that staff have made, and just want to support also and thank President Peskin for working with our staff and for coming up with some additional items to add that I think I'm also supportive of, given, again, this is like trying to be an incentive-based, benefit-based program that is encouraging what we want to see and not kind of necessarily catching everything in the net and having kind of unintended consequences. With that, I will call on Commissioner Imperial.
I have another question, Ms. Malone. In terms of the additional requirements, is that part of the recommendation under number 4?
Correct.
Okay, so that means remove the CUA additional with the no tenant buyouts, no tenant occupancy within 5 years. But you also mentioned earlier, and so forth, but you also mentioned earlier that it will not, this is kind of like more an instruction for either the Commission and also the public and also for the Planning Department in terms of looking into the demolition. This is how I see the legislation is, right? However, I just want to be clear because there are a lot of conversations, again, in terms of eliminating CUA and eliminating the DR review. I guess that's perhaps more of the clarification or perhaps more outreach perhaps at the Planning Department, or we need to be mildly reminded of that the CUA, the public, the DR review processes, in a way is still upheld, but this is just the process that we're taking in the demolition process for particular districts or areas.
I apologize, Commissioner. I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
I think I catch your meaning, which is like, really is how I was thinking about what you're saying is like that the DR, the CUA still exists for projects that that at least as some of us have expressed, not being as desirable projects, where somebody could still say, you know what, I just want to build a mansion and I don't care. Well, they're still going to come to us, I think. Yes. We have some on our agenda today. And so, those are still coming, but ones that we think, okay, these criteria we're okay with, we're kind of saying you can pass go without coming to us because we want to see you. And the other folks that are projects that we may look less favorably on for various reasons, they have to, come here first and go through that process.
I just want that to be clear in public at the same time. that know that. Because, and I do agree in terms of the, in terms of the spirit of what the interim control means, and also for us in the commission and also for the planning department, that we need to have some objective standards. So when someone comes to the CUA, when we have a CUA, because it also gives direction and clarity for the commissioners as well, and to really see project in a more objective manner. So in that way, I see now, what clearly in terms of, and also as me in terms of, the issue with the CUAs is also the tenant history. How do the commission vote when there is a tenant history on that? And I know there are still laws that perhaps that's what the city attorney is looking into. And yeah, I mean, planning commission is not rent board, but at the same time, it affects how things are being built or rehab or expanded. So thank you, Ms. Mellon, for the explanation. I will support fully of all the recommendations of the planning and the additional recommendations by Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you. Commissioner Diamond?
If there are no other comments, I would move to approve the ordinance as modified by staff recommendations and Supervisor Peskin's additional modifications that we heard today.
Second.
Thank you. I want to call on Director Hillis.
I just wanted to bring up in our conversations with Supervisor Peskin, and also in the hearings on kind of Supervisor Melgar's legislation, which also removes 317 in some cases in our districts. Two issues came up. I'm not sure they're applicable to this, but Supervisor Peskin wanted to make sure you talked about them or considered them just in case they come up at the full board. One was, there was talk about limiting the use of short-term rentals and ILOs for that new construction. Now, in those cases under Supervisor Melgar's legislation, they're actually getting a density increase, right? We're going from the RH1 to and allowing 4 units. And then also applying conditions where rent control would still be applicable to those units that are kind of bonus units. So I'm not sure that's applicable to this because we're not increasing density, but I just wanted to bring it up, for you to think about and discuss, because it may come up at the board.
So I want to make sure I repeat those back so we heard them right. So first of all, just procedurally, in order for this legislation to not come back, we want to discuss those items and have it be known that they could be discussed and possibly added at the board level. And those two items are limiting the use of these resulting units to short-term rental uses or ILO use, and perhaps prohibiting it might be the limitation. And then the second limitation, can you repeat that part?
Yeah, so in Supervisor Melgar's, if you're going from RH1 and you're taking advantage of the program, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, Aaron, or anybody, and if you're adding 3 additional units, there's discussion that those units would be subject to rent control, right? You would enter into a Costa-Hawkins agreement where those additional units would be subject to rent control. I'm not quite sure that's applicable to here because we're not adding additional units. I mean, we are relieving some process like 317 for those, or removing discretionary review. But I just wanted to throw it out that it is a discussion that's happening that may not be applicable to this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to say my thoughts on that, in order to be supportive of that concept, I would want to know a little bit more. I mean, I think in the programs we've seen where it really is a bonus program, where we're trying to say, hey, if you want to take this path, you've got the code compliant path ahead of you. If you want to do this other path, here's your option and here's the trade-off, right? Here's what you're giving and here's what you're getting. In this case, if it's just the base density that we're trying to get people to meet, right? We would like you to do what you are, allowed to do under our zoning. It just seems hard to add additional restrictions there in terms of, and the only thing I'll say on the other side, is that, rent control units that are new start out at the current market rate. And so in terms of making projects feasible, theoretically, they can put into their pro forma the current market rate, the allowable rent increases that are allowed under the rental ordinance. And so they can, I would presume, make it work if it can work at the current market rates. If it can't work at the current market rates, why would you build the project in the first place, right? So, that's kind of a little bit of on both sides, but I would be reluctant, certainly, if we get understanding that it's not really enough of a public benefit. And I think to meet the minimum density, okay, and that's allowed. If it were a bonus program, again, the logic there seems a little bit more on the side. Otherwise, we're essentially making rent control part of the zoning. I don't know. It just seems a little murky to me. Commissioner Braun?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'll just say now that I am making some more detailed comments, I want to thank staff for providing the case studies of how this legislation or how the interim legislation applied to some actual projects. I always appreciate having those illustrative examples. On these items, so just to clarify, Director Hill, so the rent control question, applying rent control to projects that take advantage of this ordinance, that just applies to basically recommendation 4, the incentive program, is that right?
I actually don't think it's applicable. I just wanted to make sure if that issue came up at the board, we kind of noodled it through. But I agree with President Tanner, probably not applicable to this ordinance because we're not adding additional density. And is the city attorney there? They can weigh in too.
She's online.
Not there, but I think President Tanner is exactly right that it's likely not applicable to this because we're not providing any density bonus.
Right, and I just
would.
want to echo those thoughts. I don't think it is applicable in this situation for this program. And then as far as limiting the use of allowing short-term rentals and ILOs in the units that are constructed under the incentive program, I'm okay with that being a restriction personally.
I agree with that. I think we do similar. The state does it for ADUs, I think, and other things. So if it can be applied, I'm certainly would be okay with that being applied. Any other thoughts, commissioners? Commissioner Imperial?
I'm kind of lost with the ILO within rent control. Is that or ILO within
separately.
the new constructions? So that would be
yeah.
So that would be the. I mean, I'm fine with in terms of ILOs within the new constructions. I think the thing is that rent controlled. It's still relatively affordable. I mean, I'm not saying relatively affordable, but I would say, it's not on the market value. You would say that because I was also looking for a new unit, and it's not. There are rent controlled units that are not 3,000. There are less than half of it, and I'm not saying that these are not affordable, but. What I'm saying is that that's why there is that conversation or the push to really preserve the rent-controlled buildings, because this is the affordable market that the public can have, is still the rent-controlled buildings, because the new constructions are not, affordable at all. Given the construction and everything. So that's my thought on that.
That makes sense. Like we're already preserving buildings that have 2 or more rent-controlled units, and so maybe it's I understand. Ms. Wadi, did you want to respond to something?
Yeah, I was just going to chime in on the ILO issue. Practically speaking, when it comes to this ordinance, the ILO ordinance, as a reminder, you're prohibited from doing ILOs in 1 to 3 unit buildings. So, a good chunk of this ordinance is for smaller scale along those lines. In buildings with 4 to 9 units, you can only do 25% of the units as ILOs, and you cannot do an ILO on any unit that's subject to price controls. So wherever that sort of nexus could happen. So really the ILOs are focused more in that, in the 10 plus unit sphere, you would still need a conditional use for any ILO in that bucket. Those would always still have to come to us. So anyhow, just to sort of outline what the program is and the practicality of where those would apply on this, just wanted to outline that for you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ruiz?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, could the city attorney speak to rent control being applicable?
I think we have Ms. Jensen on the line with us.
She's on. She should be able to unmute herself.
Ms. Jensen, are you there with us?
Kristen, you should be able to unmute your.
There we go. We can hear you.
And I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question for me? I only heard the last half. I heard you say rent control, but what is the whole question?
So we were talking about the idea of ILOs and rent control being applicable to this legislation, that this is something that would potentially come up at the Board of Supervisors. And so we wanted to get the city attorney's opinion
about whether rent control could be imposed to the new construction?
Yeah.
You know, my colleague Audrey has been drafting this, and I'm not sure if that's a question that she is still looking at. It's not one that I have been asked to look at, so unfortunately, I'm not able to answer it on the record right here.
Thank you.
And just to, I mean, Ms. Jensen, if you're there, just, you know, Supervisor Melgar's ordinance where we're allowing additional units, there's discussion, I think it's in her ordinance, that the additional units beyond the existing density would be subject to rent control through a Costa-Hawkins agreement. In this case, we're not allowing for additional units.
Right. So the general rule is you have to meet the Costa-Hawkins type requirements. In other words, you have to be offering a counterbalancing benefit, a financial or other kind of benefit in order to be able to apply rent control to the new units. But as I said, I think my colleague, Ms. Pearson, is looking at this question among others. And as a result, I'm not able to give you an off-the-cuff answer today.
Okay. I mean, I would maybe just add before I call on Commissioner Diamond, if the board is interested in trying to obtain more rent control units, which I'm certainly in favor of in general, even if they are expensive to start out, they at least have the price control and the increase moderation for those residents going forward, would be to, you know, if there is a further bonus to add to this. So, you know, this is kind of like, hey, in a program to get you to meet and to build what you're allowed. And if there was some type of bonus, whether it's a percent or a number of units or some other additional square footage or whatever it is, that could then be like another part of this program. So maybe that's like, hey, if you want a little bit more, this is what we'll be asking for, which would be some rent controlled units. So again, just literally thinking of that right now, having just heard it orally presented by you. And so, you know, not necessarily a fully fleshed out idea. Commissioner Diamond?
So it seems like ILO is so unlikely that it's, you know, not worth a lot of conversation at the commission right now. But on the rent control subject, I believe the goal of this ordinance is to incentivize people to produce the kind of housing we really want, which is a general increase in density in those districts that already allow it. And I would be opposed to putting any hurdles. You know, whether or not it really affects the price or not, it will be perceived as yet another regulatory requirement, and I don't think we should be doing that. One thing I wouldn't consider, I don't remember if it's recommendation number 4, where we're removing DR and essentially making the process faster. I don't consider that a bonus by which we should then penalize people by adding rent control on top of it. So this doesn't seem like the right ordinance to attach a rent control requirement to. Secondly, now that we're talking about other stuff, I guess it raises the question for me about, is there a possibility that state density bonus legislation would apply to any of these projects? And if so, how does that affect the 75% requirement?
I mean, they would generally apply if you're 5 units. I mean, they would apply if you're 5 units or more, which we're trying to actually encourage through this legislation by having it 75% of the density. So I think in some of these zoning districts, 75% of the maximum density is going to be over 5 units.
So it'll be so I think that's what I'm trying to understand. It's 75% of the maximum density that takes into account what you could build if you did a state density bonus?
No, it just takes into account our
right.
density.
Okay. So if you do 75% of what's required, irrespective of whether you could build more with a state density bonus, that's what would get you. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, I understand.
So
Thank
state
you.
density bonus wouldn't kind of
Can you
take
repeat
away that requirement.
Sorry, maybe I'm getting more confused. What I heard you say is that state density bonus could apply already to some of these projects, like if they're already eligible, if they're doing
Correct.
5 units or more, they could decide to do it. And so can it layer with this? Can someone use this
Sure.
program and state density bonus,
Yes.
right? Which I think is your
Right. I was
your
just
question.
trying to understand when you're doing the 75% test, what the denominator is. Is it what's permitted under the ordinance, or is it what's permitted under the ordinance as could be increased by state density bonus? And
No,
what
just
I hear
under
you,
the ordinance.
it's just the number that's permitted under the ordinance
Correct.
without taking into account potential increases with state density bonus. Okay.
Great. Okay. Thank you. All right. I don't see any other commissioner lights on, and we have a motion.
Indeed, there is a motion that has been seconded to approve this amendment with modifications presented by staff and Supervisor Peskin. On that motion, Commissioner Braun.
Aye.
Commissioner Ruiz?
Aye.
Commissioner Diamond?
Aye.
Commissioner Imperial?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
And Commission President Tanner?
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 6-0. And will place us on item 13 for case number 2020-010702 CWP for the Cultural District's informational presentation.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Miriam Chin, Planning Department staff. We're here to provide you an overview, a briefing of the cultural districts. This is a topic that you have requested. It is a very important component of our equity efforts. It is one of the components within your equity resolution, acknowledging these communities of color, underserved communities, and recognize their histories and their cultural assets. We had multiple requests from you and from Equity Council and other communities to create staff support, staff liaison. I think we're at a moment we feel we are much better organized than we were before. As you know, the cultural districts is an interagency effort. So the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development leads and provide the grants. Planning is one of the partners, so is the Office of Economic and Workforce Development and the Arts Commission. And so this interagency collaboration is what's making these cultural districts a robust platform for communities to engage and participate. We have MoCD, Grace Lee, the Cultural Districts Program Manager, and Julia Sabori from the Planning Department, our Community Development and Engagement Manager, providing you with an overview, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Grace Lee. I'm with the Mayor's Office of Community Housing and Community Development, and I am the Cultural Districts Program Manager. I'm here to provide you a brief overview of the Cultural Districts Program, and then I'll turn it over to Julia, who will give a little more insight about planning's role in this program. So the Cultural Districts Program was established by the Board of Supervisors in May 2018 as a direct response to the city's rapid gentrification and the recognition that it is the city's rich diversity that makes San Francisco so special. The program formalizes a collaborative partnership between the city and communities and brings resources to stabilize groups at risk of displacement. The program is a place-making and place-keeping initiative, and its vision is to preserve, strengthen, and promote cultural communities by supporting residents, businesses, nonprofits, community arts, social practices, and traditions. We are very lucky that later that year, in November 2018, San Francisco's voters passed Proposition E by 75%, which provides a dedicated funding source for the cultural districts out of the hotel tax revenue. Next slide. The legislation defines a cultural district as a designated geographic area that embodies a unique cultural heritage, meaning that these areas contain a concentration of cultural and historic assets, culturally significant enterprise, arts, services, and/or businesses. Additionally, a number of people who work there or spend time in that area are members of a specific cultural community or ethnic group. We focus specifically on communities and ethnic groups that have been historically discriminated against, displaced, and oppressed. And you can see on this map, we currently have 10 formally recognized cultural districts across San Francisco. And they are Japantown Cultural District, Calle 24 Latino Cultural District in the Mission, Soma Pilipinas, Transgender Cultural District in the Tenderloin, Leather and LGBTQ Cultural District, also in Soma, African American Arts and Cultural District in the Bayview, Castro LGBTQ Cultural District, American Indian Cultural District, also in the Mission, Sunset Chinese Cultural District, and Pacific Islander Cultural District in Visitation Valley. And while the program was formally established in 2018, we do want to recognize that many of these communities were doing important cultural heritage preservation and stabilization work long before the start of this program. The districts are supported in their efforts precisely because of how the program was designed and legislated. Each cultural district has an advisory board made up of members of the cultural community who provide leadership and guidance and help set the vision of the district. The community provides input and feedback on their needs and potential solutions, and the day-to-day activities are carried out by a dedicated staff. And by legislative mandate, we also have an interdepartmental steering committee that works with each of the districts to achieve their shared vision. The program is coordinated out of the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, and we work very closely in collaboration with our partners at the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, the Arts Commission, and of course, the Planning Department, with each department sharing their resources and expertise in their fields to support the realization of the community's priorities. The program aims to empower the community to determine their economic and cultural stabilization and preservation priorities. So I'm just going to provide a brief sampling of the types of activities that some of the cultural districts are engaged in. Calle 24 and the American Indian Cultural District co-organize an ongoing program called Calle Limpia Corazón Contento that activates a commercial corridor in the Mission. And a key part of this effort is to legitimize local street vendors and to get them on a pathway to small business ownership. Many cultural districts, including the African American Arts and Cultural District seen here in the upper middle picture, use arts and culture to activate public spaces to celebrate the neighborhood's cultural community and highlight local artists. Cultural heritage preservation work is a key priority for many districts, such as Japantown Cultural District, which has been collaborating with many stakeholders to support the redevelopment of the Japantown Peace Plaza to make it a more functional and flexible gathering space for the community. And one of the ways that the district's increased cultural competency can be seen in Soma Pilipinas' work of strengthening and increasing linguistically appropriate services for Filipino residents in the Soma. So those are just a few of the ways that the districts are working as leaders, connectors, and conveners to strengthen their communities. And as part of their work, each district is required to complete the Cultural History, Housing, and Economic Sustainability Strategies Report, or CHESS. And this is a strategic plan that provides a roadmap for community stabilization. The CHESS contains two main pieces. One is a history and cultural legacy statement, which provides history and context about the cultural community in San Francisco. And the other part is a set of strategies for community stabilization. These are the stabilization policy areas in that the CHESS reports focus on. They are cultural competency, which is promoting culturally appropriate services and programs in the service of social equity. Arts and culture, meaning supporting artists and cultural enterprises who embody and promote the unique heritage of the district. Housing and tenant protections, stopping displacement of residents from the neighborhoods and promoting affordable housing opportunities. Economic and workforce development, promoting economic opportunities for residents and businesses within the district. Land use, creating appropriate land use controls and zoning regulations. And finally, cultural heritage preservation, preserving and maintaining the unique cultural and historic assets and character of each district. And these strategies are developed through a robust community engagement process, usually taking well over a year to get the amount of community feedback and iteration that each of the priorities require. And also, of course, with coordination from each of the steering committee departments. Our collaborative process requires review and sign off on all of the strategies by each of the steering committee departments. As of today, there are 2 cultural districts, Japantown and Soma Pilipinas, which have their CHESS reports approved by the Board of Supervisors, and now they are working to implement on each of those strategies. And please know that we are continuing to work with each of the other cultural districts to get to that important milestone. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Julia Sabori, Community Development and Engagement Manager, currently coordinating the Cultural Districts program within the Planning Department, as well as coordinating the Activating Community Priorities piece of the Housing Element implementation effort. Since coming to the Planning Department a year ago, I really began to look at the Cultural District program with a different lens. Although it's a place-based program, it's also it's people-centered, so it's partnering geography with the cultural community itself so that they can participate at a deeper level in what's happening in land use and housing around them. 2 of the items that we work on within the Planning Department that's outlined in the legislation is that, as my colleague said, we're part of the City Steering Committee. We meet monthly with the other departments to coordinate and streamline resources, efforts, and strategies, and provide additional policy support and collaboration. Additionally, with the CHESS report, the Planning Department provides data and content to MoCD and other departments for their city sections. We author our own Planning Department section, which provides background on major projects, area plans, and other initiatives impacting that geographical footprint, and the cultural community as well. And we participate in the process that Grace mentioned, which is this iterative, half-year-long process of reviewing each of the community strategies that the larger community came up with. And we talk about city and departmental feasibility and alignment with our current work, and how do we leverage what the community is saying with what also the city is trying to address. In many, many conversations, the goals are aligned. How we get there changes from community to community, and so we have those lengthy conversations together. Since coming to the Planning Department, I've been working on community partnerships and leveraging the Racial and Social Equity Resolution, where we heard strongly from community that they really would like to have a direct point of contact at the Planning Department, and that would be a place where they could ask questions, they could demystify the department, understand better, and broaden communication. So what we've done is we have identified a planning staff person as a cultural district liaison for each of the cultural districts. They are available for questions and answers. There's a spectrum of capacity, and they participate in the CHESS report elements that I described previously, and they bring the community priorities to the discussion table within the Planning Department. How we track all these conversations is we have an internal cultural district tracker where planners can access and enter and log the projects that they're working on, short-term, long-term, that intersect with the cultural district's geography or community. And that platform is checked weekly by the liaisons, and then those projects are then shared with the cultural districts themselves. Here's a list of the cultural districts along with their planning staff liaisons. And here's the fun part of the presentation. Grace and I were able to have the honor of working with the cultural districts very intimately, and we asked them to provide updates on their work and what they would like to share directly with the Planning Commission, which photos they would like represented their work at this point in time. So the American Indian Cultural District just partnered with the Planning Department and Friendship House on the housing element implementation effort, and we had over 100 American Indian community members, and the information gathered at that town hall is going to inform their CHESS, the Friendship House's Village Project that was also here before the Commission, and activating community priorities. The African American Arts and Cultural District is working to advance, cultivate, enrich, and advocate for African American equity, cultural stability, vibrancy, and economic vitality, focusing on arts and the 3rd Street corridor. Calle 24 is working to preserve and enhance and advocate Latino cultural continuity, vitality, and community. They have many events. They work one-on-one with small businesses. They have leveraged a lot of amazing work since the pandemic, and they've really activated various arts events. The Sunset Chinese Cultural District, on the heels of finishing the Sunset Forward report, they're now working on a Sunset Opportunity Mapping Project, a Sunset Resource Guide. They have initiated their chess report, and they are uplifting the monolingual Chinese community voices through the implementation of the housing element. So they're working with our Activating Community Priorities team as well as the rezoning very deeply. Soma Filipinas is working very deeply with the Planning Department and MoCD on chess housing implementation to advance the racial and social equity goals of the housing element. This is the Castro LGBTQ Cultural District's new logo, and they recently were awarded multiple grants from OEWD to support small businesses in the neighborhood and to preserve the cultural legacy of the Castro. The Leather and LGBTQ Cultural District is right in the end zone of their chess report. They're also unveiling a new mural, installing Leather Pride flag colors on the light poles. They've been distributing fentanyl testing strips at the Up Your Alley Fair and hosting monthly Soma Second Saturdays Art and Artisan Fairs. As mentioned by my colleague, Japantown is working on Osaka Way, also known as Buchanan Mall, upgrading to improve accessibility and support. And the Transgender District is working globally and locally on their issues and their vision. They've partnered with created an entrepreneur accelerator program, and they're implementing a pilot program for guaranteed income for transgender people. And finally, the Pacific Islander Cultural District recently secured their initial funding from MoCD. They're developing their infrastructure. They secured their first home base hub. They call it the Hut, and they are beginning their chess process and activating their intergenerational community. So thank you, commissioners. It's an honor to do this work and to present. Thank you.
Okay, does that conclude the presentation? Okay, in that case, we should open up public comment. Members of the public, this is your opportunity to address the commission on this informational item. If you're in the chambers, please come forward. If you're calling in remotely, you need to press *3 or raise your hand via WebEx. Okay. Seeing no requests to speak, commissioners, public comment is closed, and this is now before you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee and Ms. Sabori, Ms. Gion, for your work. Really excited to see this here, and what a robust, kind of diverse group of cultural districts we have in our city that reflect really just the kind of plethora of and diversity of our city, which is really, really cool to see, and great to see all the pictures kind of bringing to life the different folks who are behind the cultural districts. I want to focus a little bit on the land use and cultural heritage preservation elements of the cultural districts and their chess reports or their strategies that they choose, and really kind of dig a little deeper into what we as the department can do to really kind of shore up those. In particular, I'm thinking about, for some districts, having historic preservation and landmarking of buildings is very important, and that's a process that many folks may not understand, like, you know, the different categories of what is historic, and then even the landmarking process, and then there's different levels of landmarking, all the way from kind of our local, state, and national, kind of federal landmarking, right? There's a lot of layers to that, and what the positives and the challenges can be there. I think of design standards. I think Calle 24 is a great example of using design standards to really be something that can work with local developers to have buildings that reflect the cultural district, and I think they're a super great example, but I think they're probably one of the few that have a robust set of design standards. And then also thinking about, you know, how we can understand that some communities have fought really hard for area plans and having their priorities reflected in area plans, which we unfortunately see sometimes the state density bonus can undermine if things that are codified and required can be kind of incentivized or waved away, which is maybe a more nuanced discussion. And then lastly, even the connection between our work that you all are doing and our current planning to really ensure that projects that are coming through current planning, that those planners know who is the liaison, so the liaison can let the folks know that this is happening and coming up. Because I've spoken with folks in African American Arts and Culture District, like, hey, how did this formula retail get approved? When was it on the agenda? How do we even know that it was going through? Maybe it didn't come here, and so it might not have noticed. So how are we really kind of doing that fine-grained person-to-person work? I don't know if the tracker is tracking that type of item or if that more is something that is at the behest of each planner to know. And then the last comment I'll make is for the Castro Theater, for example, and credit to Rich Sucre for owning kind of a mea culpa on we didn't do the outreach we needed to the cultural district in regards to that project coming forward, and they didn't meet with the project sponsor until pretty late in the game. And we can all talk about who was supposed to be responsible for what, but it begs the question: how are we as a department really saying at least you have to have a conversation? Because I'm naive to think that everyone's going to agree and that the project sponsor and the cultural district will all be like kumbaya. That may not always happen, but I do want to know that folks have had dialogue and at least talked about their disagreements before it's getting here to the commission. So know that's several items, and you can take them one by one. But just interested to see how can we actually make sure, in addition to liaising with folks, that we are actually helping them advance tactical, real code or other requirements that lead to the outcomes they want. And sometimes they think they have it, and then they get here and they're like, wait, we don't have any land use controls? Like, what's the purpose of our cultural district if it isn't in part to help influence land use? And so where is that message getting lost? And I just think of, again, historic preservation design standards being two really clear, actionable, implementable controls that we can have, and like, are folks aware of what they can do to kind of advance those processes?
Super appreciate those questions, and they really drill into the work that we're doing and how far we have to go. I would start off saying that first, having been the cultural district manager for the first 3 years of the program, I'd have to say land use was probably the least talked about policy area by all the cultural districts because of the nature of the technical concepts and background and just information. I feel really strong and good that I moved over to the planning department so that I can learn this technical field and we can build capacity with our cultural districts around demystifying the planning department, understanding what the scope, understanding current planning, how do these things work, how do these things happen. So capacity building is in every line of everything we do because there's a lot of training and information to share before they feel empowered to come to the table, because you don't want to bring them to the table and they don't have the information they need to have a really strong conversation. So actually, housing element is a great opportunity through activating community priorities, where we're going out and working with the African American, Fillmore Bayview, American Indian community, plus others, to talk about what is the planning department, what is the housing element. Let's start there, and then let's talk deeper about the priorities you already mentioned, the needs you mentioned through the housing element focus group, and now how do we take it to the next level. Also, we're partnering with the survey project and other efforts within the planning department that have matched, or like what Rich Sucre said yesterday at Historic Preservation, a Venn diagram where it's similar goals, where they're trying to go out and document and log these sites for preservation, where we can bring in our contacts in equity communities to participate in that process. The tracker is a work in progress. It was launched just a few weeks ago. And so we have the planners are beginning to enter that information. The liaisons are activating, checking it. And so what we have been doing is reaching out to the cultural districts themselves and learning about what are their policy focus areas. They are all listed on the notifications, but they get overwhelmed by the plethora of information. So learning about decks and windows and some of the expansions is not part of their policy focus. What they'd like to know more about are particular developments, particular small business or change of use. So right now we're working on right sizing and connecting, communicating. What is the right information? What's the focus that we want to bring them in on? And finally, With the Castro item, Rich and I are working closely together, and we're meeting with Tina, the director of the Castro Cultural District, to dig in deeper about where were the missed conversations, where could we have sat down and had a better process. And saying that much is Rich Sucre stepped into that liaison role very, very, very recently. And so I think this is an opportunity for a great partnership between him and myself to support the Castro Cultural District and learn from that and do better together.
I think, and I want to thank you for your responses. I want to just start with that one and go a little bit deeper into a couple. I think with that particular example, it just made me wonder, do we have a formal or is it an informal process by which we would expect or hope? Like, are we just hoping that project sponsors talk to cultural districts, or are we actually asking them to do that? Because if it's just a hope, well, then that's why it didn't happen. You know what I mean? But if it's like, it's an expectation, then how is that kind of, or do we need to make it more clear that it is an expectation?
Well, so since you brought this issue a couple months ago, we have brought some formality to the process in terms of sharing the information about the cultural districts with you and coordinating internally within the planning department and coordinating between the planning department and the cultural districts. So whenever there's a major project that is related to the responsibilities of the cultural district, the current planner will enter the information in the tracker or will check in with the cultural district liaison in their monthly meetings. Some of those meetings are more regular than others, depending on the load of projects that exist. And that's how we are formalizing the communication. And so the current planner can inform the project sponsor. Sometimes the community will say, will post a question, is there a project here? We're hearing there is a project. So we will check internally, in this case, from the cultural district liaison with current planners. So there is a level of formality, whether it's a specific requirement. I mean, that's something that we can elevate as we want. They get, as Julia was saying, they get the notification. So the information is there, but the point that we are kind of addressing here is elevating those issues at the appropriate level for the specific concerns.
Okay.
And just to add, I mean, as you know, our current planning division is geographically divided, and so getting, our staff who are working on the current planning side familiar with and understanding what's happening in cultural districts and working with the liaison for cultural districts. Some districts are more focused on land use and have land use flagged as bigger issues than other cultural districts, and so it's really getting to know those districts and what their priorities are and really meeting them where they are. Because, as Julia said, some are well versed on land use issues. You see them here talking about land use issues. Others were building that capacity and needing to flag where there is a particular land use issue that intersects
certainly
with the issues they're concerned about.
Yeah, and certainly if it's not a priority of the cultural district, then maybe they don't want to do design standards, maybe they don't want to landmark processes.
Right.
But I think sometimes we see that things aren't a priority until it's like urgent and the project's before us, and then they're like, well, how do we shape it? And it's like, well, the time to shape it was, a few years ago, right? The time to shape it is not when it's coming to the commission. And so I appreciate the capacity building that we're doing so folks know, like, here are some things that you could do. Here are some things other cultural districts have done. And I think in particular, I just come back to the design standards because I'm just so impressed with, I think it was a few months ago, we had a building that was applying the design standards, and the way the building was shaped and the way it looked, it just was so dynamic, and the cultural district was able to come out and support it and feel really positive about it and say, like, yeah, there's kind of some downsides, but on balance, we love what it's, you know what I mean? And so to me, that's like a successful story, and how do we have more of those versus the, oh my gosh, this thing is happening, and like, it's the 13th hour and we're trying to figure it out. So I just want to, considering projects take 2 or 3 years to get entitled, it's still amazing that can happen, right? But that happens. So I just want to make sure folks know what the options are, and then how we as a department can put our resources, because creating design standards doesn't happen overnight. And, shudder to think that a board of volunteers at the cultural district is going to be tasked with that. So can we put our architects and our resources, our professional power behind those efforts obviously with them as the deciders ultimately, but if we're going to say that we're going to adopt it as a city and like ask for projects to do it, like we need to have, I think, our skin in the game in that regard and like really put our pencils to paper and be part of that process. So I'm not sure, I don't know how Calle 24 got theirs, if we know, or if that's a replicable process, or if that was just kind of a one-off that, you know, was up to their leadership.
Yeah, we worked with them, and that was a priority they identified through MAP 2020. So yeah, it's getting ahead of these issues. And, you know, Japantown's a good example where, you know, there's been development pressure in the past. There likely will be in the future. So we're working with the community so they understand that and also know what they, you know, are they open to development? And if they are, where and what would that look like and what would their priorities be? So it's really getting out in front of those issues, setting the guidelines and standards before a project is even proposed.
Yeah, and in particular, and I think Housing Outlook is a great vehicle because it's very timely, and you know we're using so much of the geographies, which include, is not limited to, but includes the cultural districts by and large. That's a way we're trying to set other policies, and so I think really making sure that these geographies are shored up, and not just like, oh, you're protected, but it's like, what do you want to see in a visionary and forward-looking thing, not just like not having certain things happen. And upzoning has happened in many of these districts already, so they are already open for and seeing development, and it's now, again, trying to shape it in a more culturally appropriate manner. Ms. Shion, did you want to add anything? Okay, so I will cease my comments. Thank you for indulging me, and I'll call on Commissioner Imperial.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. I've been looking forward for this presentation and really trying to also in my background too, in terms of identifying the objectives for a cultural district. I think cultural districts historically is always seen as more of economic revitalization, and the chess is more than economic revitalization. There is the preservation, the stabilization, and the revitalization of it. So it is more comprehensive, and the way my understanding of the planning's role in the cultural district is in a way kind of like the liaison between other departments that includes arts, economic development, and other agencies, that whatever the cultural districts will identify as their priorities. So I always have this vision of what cultural districts would mean, that in a way that when there is a new development, that actually the planning department will be the one liaising them already in the cultural district. Until the Castro Theater happened, that I realized that's not where we're at that point. And I'm glad that we are at this point, that we're stepping up to really, in a way, uphold, or really to put highlight on the importance of the cultural district. So I guess my question now is that since, part of the chess process is that gathering the priorities and priorities and also how to get there. So in terms, one that is being said here is provide data and content to most city or other city agencies. Is planning, are we, I guess this is more, a thought process for us, but are we just liaising them to most city or other city agencies and that's it? Or, because those are those are approved in the Board of Supervisors. But how do we, let's say, a cultural district identified housing preservation as a housing strategy, then how does that translate to most city as part of their priority goals? What do we do?
It seems that we're getting a layered question, so let me see if I can try to address some of the pieces, and then my colleagues will continue. The CHESS report is kind of the structure where the 4 agencies have provided a template. For the cultural districts, as you know, the city agencies are in the back seat. The CHESS reports are conceived by the community, are designed by the community, are resourced. We provide data as needed. We provide some guidance and some additional information as needed, but that's developed by them. And so we're trying to respect that process. And the 4 agencies meet together regularly. Now, where the planning role gets a little bit more complicated, as President Turner was indicating, there's a geographic specific boundary, but many times it intersects with other efforts. Like in the case of Calle 24, it's part of the broader mission map 2020. So our job has been to make sure that the various efforts are integrated, or in the tenderloin, we have the housing element, we have HSH with a number of strategies, and we have mostly strategies. So our effort has been to make sure that if there are other strategies that intersect, that we're providing that context, we're providing that support, and we're providing that help, so we're not clashing plans, we're not confusing the community, and we're providing some level of coordination and understanding of what would be the most productive path for them to accomplish what's desired.
Okay. So in a way, we are, the planning department provides a support, but it's still up to the cultural district or the community in itself to push further whether it needs to be more legislation process or whatever process that it needs to happen.
But there's a process. So they go to the Board of Supervisors for the completion of the CHESS report. They are the ones who formally recognize and adopt the CHESS report. We're coming here and the Historic Preservation Commission to make sure that there is an understanding, and we can provide you as much information as you need, but the structure of the cultural districts are under the board.
And how do we, at this point, with the CHESS reports are still in developments in many, how do we provide capacity, or how are the cultural district getting capacity building? Because it's a lot as well for a cultural district to do it.
Thanks for your question. So one of the things that we do on a monthly basis is have an all cultural districts meeting, and a lot of those meetings are about capacity building. It's about sharing best practices, but also bringing people in from different city departments to share about their expertise. So for example, last month we had a few reps from MOCD talking about, for example, like emergency rental assistance and the legal assistance that come out of our departments. In the following months, we're going to have a presentation about the Small Sites program, which I know Soma Pilipinas is particularly interested in. And next month, we're having a presentation from the folks from SF Arts Commission. I want to acknowledge that the program is relatively young, so of course there is a lot of information and expertise that the cultural districts and I, as an administrator of the program, actually don't have. We rely on folks like Julia and the planning department to bring in that level of expertise. The CHESS itself is, even though it goes through a rigorous iteration process and is approved by each of the departments in the steering committee, it is a high-level policy document. So the next phase, once it's passed, is for the cultural districts to determine, out of those 20-odd strategies that they've identified, what do they want to prioritize first? And so, for example, Soma Pilipinas, I know they are particularly interested in moving forward some of their housing strategies. So it's very early, but we're just starting to work with them on who are we going to connect them to within our department who can support their work, either gathering data to understand the landscape of their tenants and the needs, and or how can they work perhaps specifically with our Small Sites program to identify potential sites for development and things like that.
Do you want to mention?
Add one quick thread. The depth and process and procedures of review of the community strategies within the planning department is incredibly thorough. I'd say there's at least 20 to 25 different planning staff that review the strategies. They're logged, they're put together, they're sent out to the different divisions, they're reviewed, they're commented on, and then the liaison and myself go through them. And I want to say also what's actually really exciting from a public policy perspective is that the cultural district staff and the 4 committee members, the 4 departments have representatives, and we sit together for hours and hours on multiple meetings, line by line, talking through the strategies. What do these words mean? Well, this word means something to the community, whereas that means something else in the planning department. And we dissect that, and we adjust and we edit, and the community has a very thorough process where they go back to their advisory board and their community. So it's not a just stick a policy to the wall and hope it happens. It's actually a very sort of awareness and educational process, not just for the cultural district themselves, but for the city departments that are at the table over months. And actually, I learn a lot from my current planning and citywide planning colleagues who interpret a 2-line strategy very differently than I do, and we digest it and make sure that it is feasible within the realm of our department. So we are just on the heels of Japantown and SOMA passing, so implementation is gearing up. But the process by which we get here is very, very long-term and very thorough.
Thank you so much, and glad to hear all of these updates, and I'm looking forward to to have it, more long-term.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Diamond?
Thank you. I want to follow up on an issue raised by Commissioner Tanner, and that has to do with the intersection between the cultural districts, the aspirations behind the cultural districts, and the implementation of the housing element with the upzoning that staff are currently engaged in and will be in front of us shortly. And I'm looking at the map of the 10 cultural districts, and with particular focus on those on the west side. I don't exactly know where we're drawing the boundary, but there are, there's the Sunset Chinese District, maybe the Castro LGBTQ District. I'm also concerned about areas that have a lot of cultural sensitivity that are not within one of these cultural districts. And, what comes to mind, top of mind, is Clement Street. And how is it that staff is thinking about and proceeding with ensuring that in our effort to add additional housing on the west side through the upzoning, that we're taking into account how those neighborhoods actually function and whether or not a rezoning might, the commercial corridors that run through there, might completely change property values and the nature of the development that might take place, with a negative impact on the shops that are in that area, or the elimination of the shops in those areas that cater to some of these communities. I just would love more understanding as to how you're approaching those issues.
So 2 levels. As my colleagues mentioned, the cultural districts is a very important framework. It brings with funding, it brings recognition. However, the work that those communities have been doing kind of precedes the cultural district. And there are many other communities that are not necessarily prioritized through a cultural district boundary that are doing the work, and we're responding to that. So through the rezoning process or our community work in the Fillmore in Chinatown, the cultural dimension, whether it's in events and activities or in landmarks, it's an important component of any planning initiative. So that's in terms of your overall question, how we're addressing that. More specifically, in the Sunset Chinese Cultural District, that was created at the same time, right after, in between the creation of the Sunset Forward strategies. So there was a very close process of collaboration between that community and the housing element. A lot of their strategies and their input became part of the housing element. Similarly, as the housing element was being drafted, it was shared and discussed with that community, which has made a humongous effort, because it's really nested within a school, the Wame school, and you've heard from them. So there has been some more targeted effort through the cultural district, but it's a dimension that is very important for any planning strategy that we're developing.
So with respect to the upzoning, north of the park, I'm not talking about Geary, I'm not talking about 19th or Park Presidio, but I am really worried about Clement Street. Without the cultural district protections and focus, how do you take into account the sensitivities of that neighborhood.
So the cultural district per se don't provide the land use regulations, as you commissioners have indicated. It's a vehicle to identify some of the rezonings or zoning that might be adjusted, to create landmarks, to recognize some of the legacy businesses. So it's a vehicle for that, but the cultural districts per se don't create the land use regulation. So in areas like the Richmond, or again, many other areas, it is part of our job to do an assessment and inventory of what are some of the community assets. And part of this is happening in the Sunset, but it could happen in any other area. There's a mapping, it's an inventory of what are some of the community assets, what are some of the possibilities for additional housing as well. So the community itself is recording that. And we ourselves, as we just had you probably heard a very successful community workshop, 150 people, and that primarily from the Richmond and Sunset, that came to express their preferences, their voices, the full spectrum, and there's an acknowledgement and there's an interest in retaining some of the business assets, some of the cultural assets of Clement, and some of the other little clusters throughout the Sunset and the Richmond.
Okay, I think I'm asking is because I want to make sure the focus isn't on individual landmark buildings or individual legacy businesses, but how the area operates as a neighborhood, and the services it provides in total, and how our upzoning may, have impacts on that, some of which may be positive, but others of which may have very dramatic consequences, and that broader look is happening even in the absence of a cultural district framework to do that.
And just to add to that, I think just like we did with Sunset Forward, where there's an intersection between a cultural district, and even before it was a cultural district, an area we recognized was culturally significant, in kind of the well-resourced neighborhoods where we were rezoning, we undertook extra efforts. We continue to do that, and we're hearing that in other neighborhoods as well that may not be identified as cultural districts, like the work we're doing in the Tenderloin, but I think Clement is another good example that we need to consider when we're rezoning, that there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all, even in the well-resourced neighborhoods.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't mean to just focus on Clement. It's just a prime example, and there are various other areas as well too that will be affected by this as we go through the upzoning. And to your point, I don't think we got a report on how that community meeting went, so I'm wondering if,
We're going to have that to you at the commission when you come back. We've got an item where we're giving you an update on
that would be
the
great.
housing element.
Thank you very much.
Just want to pick up on some of the things Commissioner Diamond said, and it's more just ideas, and maybe there's some thoughts or you have report out, just thinking about both, it just kind of makes me think, particularly with the Sunset Chinese Cultural District, in part because it's very clearly on the west side. We know that's an area that's been designated, hey, here's where we want to do some upzoning, and we've talked a lot about tenant protections, and helping homeowners be able to take advantage of new zoning if that's possible. And I think supervisors are working on legislation that does try to help folks, build more density. But the business piece we haven't talked as much about, unsurprisingly, because it's the housing element, not the business element. And so I do think about, what are our partners at OEWD able to do, whether it's in terms of, providing guidance on folks having longer term leases so that if a property owner does want to redevelop, they've at least got some length of time to mitigate it. The legacy business program, I'm curious, I know that there had been, at least when it started, some incentives for landlords to continue leasing essentially to the legacy businesses and some help to them. If that's still continuing, if we're seeing that program being effective, are the incentives sufficient enough? Or other tools for the businesses to have stability, whether it's buying their building, so that they own it, or other ways that they can have stability if, the upzoning does result in land values increasing and folks saying, hey, I want to turn this single-story building into something, which can be great on one hand if it's housing, but has a really sharp downside if it's, displacing a legacy or even a new business, right? But that is part of the cultural fabric. So I'm curious if we started to put thought to this. Again, our housing element is kind of tipping off this potential domino, right, in the way it could impact the commercial districts.
Well, I mean, yes, it's a housing element, but as you recall, there's a whole section of the housing element dedicated to services, businesses, and amenities that whenever we went to the community, that's what they asked for. It's not the building, it's the house. It's not just the house by itself. It functions because there is this ecosystem of support services and urban amenities that are needed. So it is in the housing element. In terms of our coordination with OEWD, our work has been much more focused in areas that are very sensitive right now, like in the Tenderloin and in areas of downtown and South of Market, where we are seeing the small businesses displacement or facing some challenges. We will do a follow-up to see in the areas of the rezoning how we want to collaborate and what are some of the strategies that we can put in place. So thank you for that request. We'll take that to our agency.
Great, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from commissioners? All right. Well, we'll just thank staff for their work, and thanks to all the cultural districts for all of their work. I know that they're also working hard, and just great to bring this item forward. Thank you.
Very good, Commissioners. Item 14, case number 2022-008748 CUA for the property at 3555 Pacific Avenue, a conditional use authorization.
Good afternoon, President Tanner and fellow commissioners. I'm Christy Alexander with Planning Department staff. The project before you is a request for a conditional use authorization pursuant to Planning Code sections 209.1, 303, and 317 to demolish an existing 3,962 square foot, two-story single-family residence and construct an approximately 8,785 square foot, three-story over garage single-family residence within the RH1 zoning district and 40X height and bulk district. Since packet publishing, the department has received correspondence from 6 neighbors expressing concerns toward the project. The concerns are centered on the amount of excavation proposed and its potential impact to adjacent homes, the construction disturbance, including noise, available parking, and pedestrian access, the building height compliance with existing covenants, the design of the accessible ramp leading to the front entrance, and the location of mechanical equipment. The sponsor has hosted one meeting within the community on March 7, 2022, where neighbors expressed concerns over the proposed height of the building and corresponding loss of views. Overall, the department finds that the project is on balance, consistent with the objectives and policies of the general plan, and meets all applicable requirements of the planning code. The proposed project has been designed to be contextual with the surrounding buildings fronting the Presidio and revised with regard to site-specific conditions and existing covenants since the initial submittal. The department also finds the project to be necessary, desirable, and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, and not to be detrimental to persons or adjacent properties in the vicinity. This concludes my presentation, and I'll be available for any questions. The project architect, Bruno Cantor, is here to make a presentation from the project sponsor team.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chrissy. And I'm assuming just toggling will get me going. All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Bruno Cantor, and I'm with Walker Moody Architects. I am representing Arthur Patterson, the owner of 3555 Pacific, who I apologize is unable to be here today. Mr. Patterson is a longtime resident of Presidio Heights, approximately 30 years. He loves the neighborhood and purchased 3555 Pacific to be a home for his family. This is not the first property in a neighborhood that he's sought entitlements for. He's actually building another home just down the street. These are not spec properties, but homes for himself and his extended family. Mr. Patterson is in his 80s and looks forward to having his kids close and his grandkids, etc. We began the process of design and neighborhood outreach over a year ago, and Christy mentioned our first meeting with the neighbors. Since then, we had multiple additional meetings to go over concerns and address them. Overall, I believe we've designed a building which fits into the context of the neighborhood and is sensitive to the immediately adjacent structures, as you heard from the planning department, is consistent with the objectives and policies of the general plan. I'll quickly walk you through some of the drawings so you have an idea of what we're talking about. Is this mic on? Yeah. All right. So if we're looking at the drawing here, you're seeing the front looking up Pacific Avenue and down Pacific Avenue. The building seems to fit into the context of the block. On this sheet, you see the existing property on the left and the proposed building on the right. You can see that the footprints are approximately the same. I will note that there's an easement, a right-of-way easement on Pacific Avenue. You'll see a dotted line coming very near the buildings there, approximately 12 feet off the Presidio wall, and that easement is for the passage of cars. We are not building to that easement. We're short of it by like 4 or 5 feet. We do have some entryway that I'll show you on one of the future drawings here. On the drawing on the left, you'll see that there's an entryway that ramps down from the area in front of the house. This does not encroach on the easement, and it serves as a landscaping area, which is one of the requirements of the planning department, and most importantly, accessibility to the house, because Mr. Patterson is in his 80s, and it was a requirement of the program very early in the project. Moving on, actually I'll talk a little bit about the side setbacks here on the floor plan to the right. You see a front setback on the left there that roughly mirrors the property side setback at the front of the building to the west. And then on the right side there, you'll see a side setback as well on the top floor to respect the neighbor's adjacent property. I will say about the roof plan here, there's going to be nothing on the roof, no equipment, no sorts of mechanical equipment, strictly chimneys and flat skylights below a 220-foot high base. From San Francisco base is the height of the property. Christy mentioned that there is a covenant restriction that allows for this property to go as high as 220 feet to maintain the views of the properties on Jackson Street on the hill above. And you'll see more of that in a section coming up here. These are the side elevations facing the west here, where we respected the privacy of the neighbor, and the privacy of the neighbor to the east as well, moving some windows. And I will just quickly say, and wrapping up with the time I have, that we've done everything we could to accommodate all the neighbors' concerns, and I think for the most part they have felt good about that. There's some issues around future construction and all of that, which I'll address when I have some more time at the microphone after we hear comments from whoever might want to speak. Thank you.
Okay, members of the public, this is your opportunity to address the commission on this matter. If you're in the chambers, please come forward. If you're calling in remotely, you need to press *3 or raise your hand via WebEx. And just for clarity's sake, sir, this is not a discretionary review, so you don't have a rebuttal, but the commissioners may have follow-up questions.
Hi, Georgia Shudish. I sent the email to you, your commission, and the HPC, and I just want to say that yesterday at the HPC, they said to Mr. Sucre, Ms. Nagaswaran, Wright, and Matsuda said they wanted their concerns expressed about this. I'm concerned because this is a Second Bay tradition. It wasn't mentioned in the staff report. I dug it out of the PIM when I saw it was a demolition. This is a $7 million tear down. The only reason you're hearing this is because you got rid of the demonstrably unaffordable clause in Section 317 a few years ago. Otherwise, this would have been administratively approved by the zoning administrator. And, you know, there was like a thing on Sanchez Street in a 100 by 100 lot that you didn't hear, which, anyway. So Mary Brown, her historic context statement, she said on 183, there are fewer than 150 Second Bay tradition single-family homes, and she said this was a conservative estimate. Now there's going to be even fewer, plus the one on Raycliffe, which made my attention because during the enforcement, they adjusted the demo calcs they adjusted the design to be just below the demo calcs, and that one's gone. That was an alteration. I have to say that I think this is a really fine home. I understand, you know, people have the right to do what they want to do, but the fact that the HRA said retains a high level of integrity and contains many of the Second Bay tradition's character-defining features. But then it goes on to write, it's not considered an innovative example or full expression of the style. Well, Hertzka and the other guy, I always blank on his name. You know who I'm talking about. They didn't do that many of them, but they did, it seems, were influenced by those Second Bay tradition designs. And I think, it's Hertzka and Knowles, excuse me. And I think it should have been in the staff report. I think it should have been mentioned today. I think that the HPC was concerned, should have been mentioned. And I also think that if anybody just walking by looks at that would say, gee, is that a Worcester? And that to me is enough that it should have been given consideration to be preserved, not downgraded to a C. And of course, there's the size, but that's something you're going to have to grapple with, going from a 3,900 square foot home to an 8,700 square foot home across from JK Park, a well-resourced neighborhood. All those things just felt like it needed to be brought to your attention. And that's it. Thanks a lot.
Okay, if there are no other members in the chambers that are coming forward, let's go to our remote caller.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, hello. That's me, right? I'm Jessica Cole, and I rep my mother, Vera Cole, of 3535 Pacific Avenue, east of the proposed demolition, excavation, and construction of a new home at 3555 Pacific. Pacific is at the bottom of a steep hill with about a 30-foot change between Jackson and Pacific. And I'll be referring to the one design letter and my letter to Ms. Alexander and my emails to all of you commissioners. We're worried about the impact of Pacific LLC's proposed demolition of the existing structure and excavation of the subterranean basement into a steep hill slope of questionable stability. 3535 Pacific is built on sand, and that's the likely composition of 3555 soil. One Design's preliminary assessment ID'd issues such as lateral stability, soil loss, and the need for extensive shoring. One Design also said the type of excavation required for the proposed structure involves extensive risks to my mom's house and potential cost to her as well as to the adjacent lots in the hillside. I respectfully request that excavation techniques and their concomitant risk management issues need to be fleshed out with the project sponsor in an agreement before the plans get approved by this commission. A second project is underway, 2 lots east by the same owner. Pacific is a narrow westbound one-way easement west. It's already plagued with wrong-way drivers and parking issues because of its proximity to a playground. This second demolition, excavation, and construction project on the same block will compound the noise and impede vehicle and pedestrian access. A few days ago, my mom's caregiver arrived for her 7 a.m. shift to find the street blocked by a vehicle when construction hours start at 7:30. My caregiver had to get out and find someone. It should be the other way around. This access issue will only worsen without an agreement with the LLC in place for 3555. We've got zero construction management, traffic management plans. Note there is construction projects happening at 3 other locations within 1 block or less of the 3500 block, all of which require parking, space for loading, and for large construction vehicles. How can we be sure that with yet another plan approved by this commission, that we will have access and necessary accommodation for my mom, her caregivers, and our neighbors when the LLC has failed to make an effort to be transparent? I disagree with Bruno Cantor's assessment of communication between all of us. He's had a meeting, but he has not been in touch with me. And we're very uncomfortable with the LLC's unreasonable lack of transparency with us and our neighbors around our concerns about the excavation, the slope of the lot, and the unstable soil composition and lack of access. And I request that a condition of the commission's approval be subject to the LLC's good faith agreement and us regarding my.
Thank you, ma'am. That is your time. Okay, last call for public. Oh, there is another remote caller.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. My name is Howard Smith. I'm the owner of 3577 Pacific Avenue, which is the property on the western boundary of the proposed redevelopment. I'd like to second and support Jessica's comments on the need for accountability and transparency around the extremely complex engineering and construction challenges involved in this project. I would also like to echo her comments on the unfortunate lack of contact that we've had directly with the owner of the project. Bruno is correct that he has had meetings with neighbors, but the owner of the LLC has not revealed himself, and we've been unable to establish any kind of communication, which I think is most unfortunate. I was hoping to be able to share a photograph with you relating to one specific challenge, but it doesn't look as though the system allows me to do that, so I'll just explain it. There is currently a low boundary wall between my property and the proposed redevelopment. It's approximately 6 feet in height. It's currently subject to an agreement which is in the public record for the joint repair and maintenance of this wall. In the proposed redevelopment, this low wall is due to become the exterior wall on the western side of the proposed dwelling. And that exterior wall will be built to a height of about 30 feet. That means the current boundary wall will need to be demolished, a new foundation dug, and a brand new exterior wall of 30 feet in height constructed. I believe this presents many risks and challenges in terms of the need to mitigate damage to surrounding properties. Lastly, I'd just like to touch briefly on the proposed ramp and fencing that Bruno spoke of in his remarks. I understand it is to provide accessibility for elderly or infirm residents and visitors to the house. While acknowledging that need, I do feel the feature is inconsistent with the common rhythms and elements and the architectural expressions in the neighborhood. No other home on the block has such a feature, and I think it's important that the Commission consider that particular feature and ask for it to be reconsidered or indeed removed. Thank you. That concludes my remarks.
Okay, last call for public comment. Again, if you're in the chambers, please come forward. If you're calling in remotely, you need to press *3. If you're on WebEx, you need to raise your hand. Seeing no additional requests to speak, Commissioners, public comment is closed, and this matter is now before you.
Thank you. I wonder, Mr. Cantor, you heard some comments from the neighbors regarding concerns around excavation of soil, geotechnical issues, and kind of how this will be managed, as well as construction management. I know that you're at the entitlement phase, and so some of those issues may not have been researched yet. Could you please expound on kind of what would give them comfort to your soil excavation plans and kind of any geotechnical issues you may encounter in the project's construction?
Absolutely. I want to acknowledge the concerns of the neighbors on this issue. Even though it may not be the purview of this commission, it's the structural engineering, the building, and that's sort of, any shoring engineering and the construction management of the project as well. In the coming months and well into the next year, there'll be a standard care of practice of skilled professionals and engineers working together to design a structure that will maintain the condition of the existing properties. And of course, there will be eventually building department review before any permit is issued to build, and potentially other peer review with the neighbors. We will continue to work closely with the adjacent neighbors, and certainly Mr. Patterson will work in good faith to reach agreements with his neighbors on all these issues in regards to construction and how that process will move forward. Again, this will all come in due course as we develop the details of this project over the year. Right now, we're just talking about the envelope of the building, and I certainly heard Jessica and Howard's concerns, which I'm happy to even discuss further with them as we move along. As far as I'll just leave it at that. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
I did have one question that's unrelated to those matters, because as you said, they'll kind of come, this is a really conceptual level of the project at this point, not the technical engineering level. Just regarding kind of the size of the structure, and that's the challenge for me. Certainly, obviously, a very well-off part of the city, not a stranger to like large homes. Just curious if your client considered adding additional units, whether he's going to live there or other people are going to live there. That's not really for us to consider who's going to use the property, but how is it designed and kind of the use of it in general. And so, I would have loved to see an additional unit in this property, but I'm wondering if that was a discussion, and if it was, what were the pros and cons, and kind of why did we get to the project that's proposed today?
Yeah, well, I'm with you. First of all, I've lived in the city 30 years myself, and I understand the plight with the lack of housing. For Mr. Patterson, he's always set out to have this as a family property for the use of his family. In fact, the owners of the previous property, there were only 2 owners that existed at this property since it was first built, and it hasn't been used in anything other than single family. I don't know that it fits zoned for anything otherwise, although with the new entitlements or the new laws from the state, there's always opportunity to increase the amount of units you have on the property. But for Mr. Patterson, he's up in his years, and he's just trying to get his family to be near him, and that's the primary use of this property.
Okay. And I'll just make one last comment before I want to hear from other commissioners their thoughts, which is just, I appreciate the ramp being there, and I think I was looking, there's not seeming to be an elevator, at least that I could see. Is there an elevator? I was trying to look for it. I was just trying to figure it out. So can you go over the mechanical stuff? Because I know that was a concern that neighbors talked about. So maybe you can share how you are handling the mechanical equipment associated with it, because I know you did not have it on the roof plan, and so folks can maybe understand how that, because I know that was a concern that that was raised by some neighbors as well.
If you'd like to put, there we go. Great. On the overhead there. So if you look at the drawing on the left, which is the basement grade level, you can see the ramp again. Below that line that goes across the top of the page where is the right-of-way easement. So we haven't interrupted the easement. And you can see an elevator down in the entry lobby there towards the middle of the project where there's that section tag halfway down. So accessibility was always an important issue here. As you can also see down there on that lower level a large mechanical area. So all the mechanical equipment will be in the basement, and
as opposed to the rooftop.
Opposed to the rooftop, the only thing that will be on the rooftop will be chimneys and roof vents. And this is allowed by the covenant of restriction.
Great, thank you very much for explaining that. I think the only other question I had, Ms. Alexander, was you noted that even though there were some concerns raised about existing covenants, I think we heard from Mr. Cantor that we are satisfied that all of the covenants are being respected by the proposed project. So folks can be assured that that's all taken care of. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, great, thank you. So my only comments, commissioners, would be, it's code compliant project. This is what we have said folks can build, and as you have heard me say, that is what I think we should do, is tell people what they can build where, and then when they follow the rules, allow it. Of course, this is a conditional use authorization that is asking for approval to do so, but as Mr. Cantor said, other than adding an ADU or perhaps an ADU and a JADU, this is zoned for a single-family home, albeit a very, very large home in this case. So while it is not my favorite project, I would say, I would be inclined to support it. With that, I'll call on Commissioner Koppel.
Move to approve.
Second.
Commissioner Diamond, did you want to add anything else?
I was going to make the same point, which is we set rules and people design under the rules. If we don't like really large projects, then we should change the rules. But at the moment, we have districts in the city where you're allowed to build large houses, and it would have been nice if they included an ADU. We would have all appreciated that, but you're not required to build an ADU. And I feel like we should be approving code-compliant projects that follow our rules, and the excavation concerns, which are real, will be addressed at the point in the process where they go in front of the building department, and that's the way we set this up. So that's why I seconded the motion, and I'm in favor of this.
Thank you.
If there's nothing further, Commissioners, there is a motion that has been seconded to approve this matter with conditions. On that motion, Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Commissioner Ruiz?
Aye.
Commissioner Diamond?
Aye.
Commissioner Imperial?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
And Commissioner President Tanner?
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. The motion passes unanimously 6-0.
We're about halfway through, so why don't we take a short break, and then we'll come back and finish our agenda.
SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television.
Okay, welcome back to the San Francisco Planning Commission hearing for Thursday, July 20th, 2023. Commissioners, we left off under your regular calendar on item 16 for case number 2022-008046 CUA for the property at 511 Elizabeth Street, a conditional use authorization.
Good afternoon, President Tanner, fellow commissioners, Jeff Horn, Planning Department staff. The item before you is a request for conditional use authorization pursuant to Planning Code Section 209.1, 303, and 317 to demolish an existing single-family home within the RH2 zoning district located at 511 Elizabeth Street. The project site is located in Noe Valley neighborhood on the south side of Elizabeth between Castro Street and Noe Streets. To the west, there's a single-family home, and to the east, the properties are fronting on Noe Street, creating a key lot configuration, and the project abuts the rear yards of those properties. The project site is developed with an existing 2,396 gross square foot, 2-story, 3-bedroom, 1-family dwelling proposed to be demolished and to be replaced with a 5,901 gross square foot, 4-story, 2-family dwelling. The units will be broken up between a 2,271 square foot 2-bedroom unit, unit 1. At the lower floors, a 2,553 square foot 4-bedroom unit on the 2 upper floors, and a shared 837 square foot 2-vehicle garage at the ground floor. The project has gone through minor modifications since its initial submittal, including not relocating the location of the existing garage to try to retain the existing street tree and curb cut location. The building was lifted from its initial proposal to try to reduce its encroachment into the sidewalk for the driveway. The project also initially had a common foyer, which has been created into 2 doors to create 2 distinct entrances for these 2 distinct units. Since the noticing of the case report, the department has received 1 comment from the public with requesting condition of approval be created to memorialize the tenure of the project. Other than that, the department finds the project to be, on balance, consistent with the objectives and policies of the general plan. The proposed building has been contextually designed with regard to the site-specific conditions and provides 2 quality family-sized units to the city's housing stock within a well-resourced neighborhood. The department also finds the project to be necessary, desirable, and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, and not to be detrimental to persons or adjacent properties in the vicinity. This concludes staff's presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Project sponsor, you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mike Kennedy. I live at the property, own the property with my family. My wife and I bought it in 2004 and moved in, and have since had 2 children and live there with our family. And the proposal is to, based on our growing family and others, to have this be a 2-unit building and have us live in the upper unit.
You have 4 minutes left. All right, perfect. Thank you.
Very good, Commissioners. With that, we should take public comment. Members of the public, this is your opportunity to address the Commission. If you're in the chambers, please come forward. If you're calling in remotely, you need to press *3 or raise your hand via WebEx.
Thanks for the time. Georgia Shudish, everybody saw the 48 Hills article, so of course everybody got concerned. I knew about this beforehand, and I didn't really think anything of it because I knew that the project sponsor had lived there a long time, so I assumed that this was not a spec project to flip like all of them that have been in Noe Valley in the last 10 years. And I appreciate Mr. Horn and the staff's review that they found that it wasn't an alteration, it was a real demolition. I think that's a good thing, even though no one likes to see things demolished, especially if they're Second Bay traditions, but that's another story. So my only point was when I read the findings, the relative affordability finding, which is important when you do a demolition. It's in there. It's been there forever in 317. And it stated that this would be a net new rental unit. And that's a great thing because I watched last week when Mr. Egan was here, and he said it's very, 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 very hard to have rental units. And so my only request is that if the tenure changes, the project sponsor or whoever lets the commission and the staff know that this is no longer a rental unit, but it's going to either be a condo, or if, for example, the entitlement is sold, because that has happened in Noe Valley. You had that one up in Grandview where the entitlement is still for sale, and there was one on 24th Street where the entitlement just sold and now it's underway. So I don't want to cast shade on them with that issue, but I think that it would not be a constraint on the project if they let you know that there was some change, whether in the tenure or even if they sell the entitlement. It's information that maybe the commission and the staff need going forward as you deal with densification and the housing element. So that's it. Thank you, and good luck to on their project, because I don't think that is a spec project, given how long they've owned the property. At least I hope not. Thank you very much.
Okay, last call for public comment. Seeing no additional requests to speak, Commissioners, public comment is closed, and this matter is now before you.
Just want to applaud the brevity of your remarks, and also this project is what we do hope to see more of, so I hope that it serves you and your family very well. Commissioner Koppel.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that motion to approve with conditions, Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Commissioner Ruiz?
Aye.
Commissioner Diamond?
Aye.
Commissioner Imperial?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
And Commission President Tanner?
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 6-0. And Commissioners, if you would indulge me, there was a gentleman here earlier who was asking about our next item, number 17, on Bush Street. And I suggested to him that we probably wouldn't get to it till about 3 o'clock, and I don't see him here now. So I told him it was a guesstimate, but...
Well, are the folks for item 18 present? Do you mind going earlier? Is the staff for item 18 present? We should have... Do you know if it was a person who was interested, or was it the sponsor?
Yeah, no, it was a gentleman. It was a gentleman, I think, who was interested in the case. I don't believe him to be the sponsor.
Okay.
I
Well, we'll
don't
see
see
if the
him in
staff
the
are here.
chambers.
I'm fine switching, and if, we are short on the item 18, then that is a hazard of leaving early and guessing of the time of the commission hearing, but...
Were you that gentleman?
Oh, okay. So
Okay.
he's not able to be here. Okay.
Okay, never
We'll
mind
just
then.
continue as is. Sorry. We're going to just do item 17.
Very good.
False alarm.
Thank you. Item 17, case number 2022-010729 CUI for the property at 779 Bush Street, conditional use authorization.
Great. Whatever order, we're good. All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Claire Feeney, Planning Department staff. The item before you is a conditional use authorization pursuant to Planning Code Sections 202.12, 209.3, and 303 for a change of use from an approximately 3,500 square foot laundromat use to establish a bar use on the ground floor and on the ground floor and basement level of a two-story mixed-use building within the RC4 zoning district. The existing building is a historic resource, and there are 2 apartments on the second floor, and the commercial tenant space is vacant. The project proposes no exterior changes. The project site was formerly the Wash House Laundromat, which was closed on May 30th, 2023. The business owner voluntarily closed the laundromat because it was a financial hardship and he wanted to leave the profession. The project applicant, who is also the property owner, is a longtime neighborhood resident, and he owns and runs the restaurant across the street. There are specific code requirements for removing a laundromat use. A planning code text amendment was added in 2021 for a conditional use authorization requirement for the change of use or demolition of laundromats. The ordinance will sunset 3 years after adoption, November 2024. The findings require the Planning Commission to determine if there are still accessible laundromats available and how low-income residents will engage with the new use. Without this legislation, the project would have been principally permitted and subject to streamlined review under Prop H. Currently, there are no laundromats within 600 feet, the Planning Department's standard for immediate vicinity, but there are comparable laundromat uses nearby. There is a laundromat at 1107 Leavenworth, which is approximately 11 minutes away, and there's also a laundromat at 1347 Sacramento Street, which is about 12 minutes away. Within a mile of the project site, there are a total of 17 laundromats and 15 dry cleaning and commercial laundry facilities. A letter of public comment mentioned 2 laundromat closures nearby. However, neither qualify for the planning code findings. Both were outside of the immediate vicinity, and one closed almost 4 years ago. The proposal to fill a vacant tenant space with a bar is directly aligned with the roadmap to downtown recovery plan. Opening a new nightlife-oriented use near Union Square supports the numerous larger-scale policy efforts to bring people and commerce back into the city. To date, the department has received 4 messages of support and 2 letters of opposition to the project. These supporters are all nearby residents and mentioned that they like the bar operators as community partners, enjoy their other restaurant, are excited for a new place to socialize, and that they would like the laundromat closed because of the people it draws to the area. The opponents are also immediate neighbors and noted the scarcity of laundromats in the area, including those 2 closures nearby that I mentioned, the high concentration of alcohol-serving businesses, and that some of them have not fully recovered from the pandemic, and the importance of laundromats for both tourists visiting the area and residents living in older apartment buildings or residential hotels. The project sponsor hosted a pre-application meeting in April 2023, which no one attended. The project sponsor had previously contacted all registered neighborhood groups within the downtown Civic Center neighborhood when they initially submitted their application, and no groups responded at that time either. They had also contacted District 3 Supervisor Peskin's office about the project. He was supportive of hosting a pre-application meeting and had no other specific recommendations. The department finds that the project is, on balance, consistent with the objectives and policies of the general plan. The project proposes to activate a vacant commercial storefront and will replace a business that was an economic hardship for its proprietor. The proposed bar use will complement the existing commercial landscape of the area. There are many bars and restaurants, as well as numerous theaters, entertainment spaces, and concert venues. The project site is near Union Square, a critical commercial engine for San Francisco, which is struggling to recover from the pandemic. Opening a new business in the area is directly in sync with the downtown recovery plan. And the department also finds the project to be necessary, desirable, and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, and not to be detrimental to persons or adjacent properties in the vicinity. The project sponsor is here to give a presentation, and staff will be available for questions.
Project
Good
sponsor, you have
afternoon,
5 minutes.
Commissioners. David Villalobos, CLA Consulting. Project sponsors here as well, Mr. Abigai. As Ms. Feeney mentioned, the space is vacant, currently vacant. It had been terribly underutilized, making it unsustainable business. The building owner did reach out pre-pandemic to folks who might be interested in taking it over, but when they reviewed the financial records, no one was interested. In our outreach and speaking to folks from the neighborhood, we learned that several of the buildings, residential buildings, the owners had installed laundry facilities, which a lot of the older buildings are doing now. So probably that's why no one was using the laundromat anymore. I can tell you that Petruzzi Architects, if this is approved, will be designing the bar, and they do beautiful work. It's not going to be a nightclub. There won't be any entertainment permit. It'll just be a beautiful place for people to relax and enjoy a drink and meet with each other. So the project sponsor's here. He has lots of experience with this type of business, and he's been a business owner in San Francisco for decades and decades. So he can tell you a little bit about what he's planning for the area.
Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Mike Abuyagi, and I've owned the laundromat that we closed down a few months back because we're not able to continue to utilize and make profit in that laundromat. So it's costing us money every month that it stays open. So we had to come up with a business plan to do something else. My family owns the building, which is across the street, where I have a restaurant, Element Restaurant, in one of the retail spaces downstairs. We've been in that neighborhood since 1983. I grew up on that block, and we just want to make the neighborhood better by having a service, keeping the sidewalks clean, having an open business, having the lights on, having activity. And we've studied other ideas to do in this space besides a laundromat. And the only thing that really makes sense in that area is food and drinks. People want to eat, they want to drink, and they want to go out and they want to enjoy themselves. That's what that area is. It's very close to Union Square. There's a lot of residential. It's a high-density neighborhood, so there's a lot of residents, young and old people live in the area that want something to do. And we're not planning on doing. We're not trying to do a nightclub. We're not applying for an entertainment license. We just want to do a nice build out and have a place where the neighborhood can enjoy and keep the lights on, keep the sidewalks clean, keep the front of the building clean, and have some activity in the neighborhood. Thank you.
I also want to point out, Commissioners, that prior to the CUA application, we had to file with ABC and do a posting for 30 days, and they received no formal letters of opposition. So that concludes our, if you have any questions, please feel free.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we should open up public comment. Members of the public, this is your opportunity to address the Commission on this matter. If you're in the chambers, please come forward. If you're calling in remotely, you need to press *3. Seeing no request to speak, Commissioners, public comment is closed, and this matter is now before you.
I would just say I'm going to be enthusiastically supporting this project. Great to see local business opening another business in an area that, as Ms. Feeney said, aligns with our plans for downtown recovery and Union Square and really making San Francisco kind of go again. So very, very excited to support this. And as you noted, we do see more and more buildings that we approve having in-unit washer and dryer. So it's no surprise that and others adding an existing building. So we may not see very many laundromats, but even here, there are 17 laundromats within a mile, so it does feel like even if folks need that service, they can find it relatively close to where they live if they're still needing the laundromat. With that, I will call on Commissioner Braun.
Yes, so I just want to note that it is always a little disappointing to see a laundromat closed, only because I've spent the majority of my life in San Francisco not having on-site laundry whatsoever and having to go to a laundromat, and certainly when you're hauling a lot of stuff, it's always better to have one very close by. However, I don't think that the solution to that problem and the economic challenges of laundromats is to prevent their change of use, because why would anyone open a new laundromat if they're going to feel like they're going to get locked into that use forever? So with that said, I think the project is very exciting. I think it's going to add a lot more vibrancy and nightlife to this area, as President Tanner mentioned. And so I move to approve.
Second.
Okay, Commissioners, if there's nothing further, there is a motion that has been seconded to approve with conditions. On that motion, Commissioner Braun.
Aye.
Commissioner Ruiz.
Aye.
Commissioner Diamond.
Aye.
Commissioner Imperial.
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel.
Aye.
And Commission President Tanner.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 6-0 and places us on your final item today, number 18, case number 2018-009733, CUA for the property at 290 San Bruno Avenue, conditional use authorization.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Alex Westoff, Planning Department staff. The item before you today is a conditional use authorization for a parcel delivery service use pursuant to Planning Code Sections 210.3 and 303. The project is located at 290 San Bruno Avenue, Assessor Block 3933 and Lot 001 in the PDR 1D zoning district and the 40X height and bulk district. Interim controls sponsored by Supervisor Dorsey remain effective from April 1st, 2022 and require conditional use authorizations for parcel delivery service uses, including in districts in which the use was previously permitted. The site is improved with a 2-story concrete block building spanning the northern lot line, as well as a smaller building on the southeast corner, which is proposed for demolition. The project also includes parking lot improvements and seasonal use of the parking lot for parcel delivery services during November and December months. Since the publishing of the case report, Planning Department staff have received correspondence from 2 members of the public in opposition. Complaints have included neglect, blight, and graffiti on site. The department recommends approval with conditions. The project sponsor will now make a presentation. Thank you.
You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Andrew Butt. I'm an architect with Interactive Resources based in Richmond, California. And first, I'd like to read a short letter on behalf of my client, UPS. UPS has provided package delivery service since 1962 when it opened the 4-story building at 2222 17th Street. UPS is also considered one of the largest employers in San Francisco, employing an average of 400 part-time and full-time employees. It also provides excellent benefits and competitive wages. In addition, UPS grants world-class package logistics services and is a constant quest to deliver to every address in San Francisco. The evolution of e-commerce has brought extraordinary growth in delivery services, and UPS is among the best to provide such convenience. UPS is optimistic about the future and its ability to operate successfully. Thus, expanding its operating facility during the peak delivery times is crucial to UPS and its customers. Though we process thousands of packages daily during the peak season, we appreciate that each reaches its destination. By operating a small distribution center at 290 San Bruno Avenue, UPS can provide the needed services to satisfy the holiday rush. UPS will conduct a sorting operation at this proposed site between the hours of 4 a.m. and 9 a.m. during the holiday season and employee parking. Moreover, expanding this site and providing parking spaces for employees will ultimately decrease street parking, allowing nearby residents and other businesses to find a safe place to park. UPS has considered all aspects of this project, from regulatory, environmental, and compliance responsibilities to the well-being of each employee working at the facility. Thus, UPS must comply with all rules and regulations and is mindful of the public interest and opinions. UPS appreciates the consideration to approve this project and the representatives that have assisted us in completing this process. Thank you. And UPS is here additionally to answer any questions you might have related to operations or other issues. So with that, I'll real quickly go through our presentation. Is this mic work? Yeah. Okay, so if you can see, this first sheet just shows where the location is, the vicinity map and location within the city of San Francisco to the right. And the scope of work for this project includes, as Alex mentioned, demolition of an existing 2-story concrete building, regrading and paving an area of building demolition with pervious concrete, approximately 10,000 square feet, overlay existing AC paving with slurry seal, widen and relocate existing driveways, a total of 2, relocate existing wrought iron fence and sliding gate, install new chain link fence, install new trash enclosure, install new pole-mounted parking lot lights, restripe the parking lot, and provide trenching for power and data lines for portable distribution center. This is the existing site plan, and to the far top right of the site there is the building that's going to be demolished. These are some photos of the site. And again, the bottom right, you can see the building with the arched windows is the one that's going to be demolished. This is the demolition site plan showing again that building at 290 San Bruno to be demolished to make way for the new paving and sorting facilities. And then this is just a 3D showing what the site would look like once the building is demolished and the sorting facilities are built out. This is the new site plan, which essentially is just creating a paved area upon which this equipment will be placed. And that's the extent of our presentation. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you. We should open up public comment. If there is any members of the public, this is your opportunity to address the commission on this matter. You need to press *3 if you're calling in remotely, or come forward if you're in the chamber. Seeing no request to speak, commissioners, public comment is closed, and this matter is now before you.
Thank you for bringing this forward. I just had one question that's not necessarily specific to this project. I was curious for UPS, just overall, whether it's electrification or move to hydrogen fuel cells, like what the greening and kind of sustainability of the UPS fleet looks like in the future. I was curious, I didn't notice, maybe I overlooked it, if there's any like charging facilities or any, or if these are just all gas-powered vehicles, what we can expect to be at the site. Don't all jump at once to answer the question, but.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Leo Ramirez. I'm the Community Relations Manager, and we currently don't have someone here to be able to directly answer that question. I know that the organization is always looking at alternative fuel options, but that's kind of where we're at currently.
Are these all planned to be gas-powered vehicles then? Do you know? Like the vehicles that would be operating at this site?
Gas vehicles, correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from commissioners? Commissioner Koppel?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, commissioners. On that motion to approve with conditions, Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Commissioner Ruiz?
Aye.
Commissioner Diamond?
Aye.
Commissioner Imperial?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
And Commission President Tanner?
Aye.
So moved, commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 6-0 and concludes your early hearing early.
Okay, we are adjourned, and we're starting early next week, noon next week as well. We're adjourned. Thank you.